So, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, welcome to day 2. Very excited to have all of you here with us. Now, first things first, okay? If any of you want to move to the front or move to the middle, please go ahead. More importantly is all of you are able to have a good view of the panelists here. So please feel free to move around. We do have some space available. Now, also, should you see anybody who needs a sign language interpreter, please let us know. We do have one on site to assist in interpretation as well. So please let us know as well if you happen to see anybody who needs sign language. I'd like you to look to the screens. So if you'd like a rundown of the program for today, please kindly scan the QR code. I'll give you about 20 seconds to do so if you wish. You'll go to the landing page where you can see all the information about our event today and of course all our panelists today as well. Okay, and we're going to move on to Pigeonhole once again. So the way we're going to have question and answer will also be using Pigeonhole today. So we'd like all of you to log in, pigeonhole.at, key in this event passcode. Should you need the Wi-Fi network, you can see it right at the top of the screen. So we'll give you about a minute or so to log in. Once again, the URL, pigeonhole.at, the passcode CACONF2018. Good morning to our friends just joining us. Please feel free to take a seat. You can take a seat at the front if you wish. So once again, we are logging on to Pigeonhole. But of course, if you wish to ask questions via the microphone, please feel free to do so as well. Okay, so we're going to start. A very good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 2 of Culture Academy's conference on accessibility for diverse communities, the role of cultural institutions. So yesterday we had a very good discussion. I hope all of you had time to go back and think about some of the subjects that were raised. And of course today we hope to delve a bit more in depth into some of the topics, perhaps to pick up from where we left yesterday as well. Okay, so gentle reminder, we do have our graphic artist here, Miss Wendy, just there recording. So we're going to print out for you at the end of this conference. So please remember to pick it up later on your way out, and I will remind all of you as well. So, panel 4, yesterday we had 3 panels. Today is the 4th panel. Making arts and culture affordable. Who pays and what counts? Now, first let me introduce the panelists for this panel. We have Dr. Sharon Chang, Senior Deputy Director, Research, Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. Mr. Aaron Seeto, Director, Museum of Modern Contemporary Art in Nusantara, Museum MACAN, Indonesia. And Mr. Chng Hak-Peng, Chief Executive Officer, Singapore Symphony Group. This panel will be moderated by Ms. Serene Lim, Director, Policy and Planning, National Arts Council. Now, before we hand the time over to the moderator, I'd like to remind all our guests, please kindly upload your questions onto Pigeonhole. Should you wish to ask questions later, please remember to identify yourself via the microphone as well. So without further ado, I would like to hand the time over to Ms. Lim.
Right, thank you. Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being with us here bright and early Friday. Happy to welcome Sharon, Aaron, and Hak-Peng with us to the panel this morning. We're here to discuss, I think, a topic that is very close to the hearts of our arts community, and for us, as a lot of us as administrators as well, on the topic of making the arts and culture affordable. And I think the big, hairy question that we want to answer is then who pays and what counts? So where do we draw that balance between more access, so free tickets versus discounted tickets, and balancing the books? And where does this notion of affordability, does it then necessarily lead to growing new audiences? So our 3 panelists will share with us their perspectives from very different perspectives. Sharon will come in from a researcher point of view, talk about the willingness to pay and understanding affordability, and the competing demands for the private pockets and the public purse, as she calls it. Then following that, Aaron will share with us, the efforts by the museum as a case study and discuss the broader role that a private museum can play in greater engagement with the arts. And then finally, we'll invite Hak-Peng, who will share with us how a national orchestra for Singapore looks at this and towards the question about long-term financial sustainability as well. So with that, please allow me to introduce our first speaker this morning. Each speaker will have about 20 minutes. So I did tell them, I said, whatever the first speaker saves, the time saving will be passed on to the second and then to the third. So Hak-Peng could potentially be speaking for about 40 minutes. Just saying, okay? So Sharon, she, as introduced, Sharon is our Senior Deputy Director for Research at MCCY. She's also double hats as the Chief Research Officer for the National Arts Council. Sharon's team conducts population surveys on social capital, time use, social attitudes and well-being, arts and cultural engagement in Singapore, as well as the arts and cultural manpower surveys. She's an economist by training, who has research experience in productivity, measurement and growth and so forth. And she will be the one who will put the arts and talk about those demand and supply curves and all that. She has degrees from NUS, the LSE, and University of Queensland, Australia. So with that, I hand the time over to Sharon, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's getting cozier and cozier. I think by the time we get to the end of the day, it'll probably be a tete-a-tete or mano between Tangam and a couple of us. Anyway, I like this panel because that's got a poetic justice. You know, I share my first name almost with Aaron, and I share my surname with Hak-Peng. Okay, it takes some time. It's my Friday morning after all. Yeah. Anyway, so you've heard much yesterday about how our cultural institutions from Singapore and other parts of the world are trying to enhance accessibility to a range of cultural services, museums, festivals. So building communities through enhancing accessibility is indeed a worthy ideal, but so are many other national strategic priorities. It thus behooves us to ask the not always popular question, who pays or who should pay? And who better to raise this topic on the Friday morning than an economist? Please don't kill me. So in the next 10 minutes that I have, I'd like to do three things. First, understand what underpins the demand for cultural goods and services. For those of you who miss your Economics 101 or back in JC, this is your chance to enjoy. Secondly, look at how cultural goods and services are priced or not priced, and because we cannot pay for something for which there is no price. And lastly, and with a quick overview of some contrasting analytical approaches to measuring value or impact and reflections on research methods. As we have friends from overseas with us, Meredith, David, I'd like to start, and Remy and everybody else, I'm now testing my memory of names and faces. I thought it'd be useful to share some context with them regarding the cultural consumption habits of the Singaporean. Quoting the New York Times, June 10, 2011, open quote, called a cultural desert too many times to count, the Lion City has never been associated with the thriving art and design scenes of places like Jakarta or Bangkok. Rather, it's seen as a bastion of sanitized, chewing gum-free efficiency, admired for its modernity and order in otherwise chaotic Southeast Asia. Yay, Singapore, close unquote. Of course, the article went on then to list some vignettes of our culture awakening. I like to think that since then we have made some strides in getting Singaporeans excited, well, okay, interested if not excited about engaging in culture. From 2005, we have doubled the population engaged in the arts, defined as having gone to one arts event in the last, at least one arts event in the last 12 months, and we are very inclusive when it comes to what we mean by arts. It's doubled, almost doubled from 33% in 2005 to 54% in 2018. 2015 was a bumper year for us because it was the year we celebrated Singapore 50, and so there was lots of funding going around. And of course, if you were a classical economist, you believe that supply creates its own demand. A lot more people were going to arts events. But then that was the year also when our minister, mentor, passed away, and so there were lots of exhibitions to his life, and so some people might have thought that going to one of these exhibitions counted as enjoying heritage. Well, among those who did not go even once in the past year, cost was not an issue. However, I would qualify this. A respondent, when he answers our surveys, and our survey typically is a house-to-house survey, face-to-face, covering 2,000 people, reflective of the population. So when a respondent answers, he answers as an individual, not as a head of the household. So while consuming the arts may not be expensive to an individual, consuming as an entire family, and one generally goes to the arts with friends or with family, maybe. So the main reason why people say they haven't gone, didn't go, may not want to go is because they don't have enough free time. And that perhaps is the reality of life in Singapore. Or maybe you share that experience as well in your urban, if you came from an urban area. Let me now quickly get on to the presentation proper. Wherein springs the problem of paying for culture? We have no such angst over paying for a burger. This situation arises because of our fundamental belief that every resident of a country must have access to culture. But since not everyone has the means or the desire to pay for culture, there is a divergence between the optimal amount of culture that should be produced and consumed of a country. So what's good for society versus what's good for the private individual. So as a country, as a society, we think, and especially as one coming to its own as a developed nation state, we think there should be a particular amount of culture. That's all very well, but if you look at the equilibrium point, which is ideal, that's going to cost us a much higher price. So who pays? And if, for those of you who remember your economics back in first year university, the divergence between private benefits and social benefits is because there are externalities. So if I've already built a museum, I've already built a performing arts center, there are people who would enjoy it whether or not they pay for it. So to the private individual, if you ask him to donate, he will go like, why should I? My neighbor can do that. Why shouldn't I be the one enjoying the free ride? That's also the desire for inclusivity. So if, as I said earlier, we believe that every child, every person, every Singaporean, every resident in Singapore, every visitor to Singapore should have some access to what is Singapore art, Singapore heritage, then we want everyone to get at least a taste of this. But again, coming back to that, so what's good for the country may not be willingly borne by the individual. So the next slide digs a little deeper to look at what underpins demand. The basic and traditional economic assumption is that of a rational individual. You call him or her Homo economicus, but sometimes they behave more like Homer Simpson ignoramus. So this rational individual predictably picks options that accord them the highest satisfaction. Economic jargon, we call that utility. For most goods, the law of diminishing marginal utility dictates that after a certain point, the more you consume of a certain good, the less and less additional pleasure you will get. I actually want to point to this, but I don't quite know how to activate the laser. Okay. It's not working. All right. Okay. Technical advances is clearly the norm in Singapore. Anyway, but for culture goods, after a certain point, because of exposure, because of addiction, I use the word very loosely, you might find that the more you consume, the more utility you get. And this opportunity cost of cultural consumption, and which is decreasing in the stock of consumed cultural services and commodities, has been validated by studies such as Becker and Murphy. This is a bit for those who are interested in validating what I said. Becker and Murphy, 1988, Stigler and Becker, 1977. These arguments provide support for the point that enhancing free visits to museums today, taking on David's point, or providing free arts performances at convenient locations will help to drive demand for arts and culture heritage in the future. The diagram below is a little small, I'm sorry. It's from Ajisen and Fishman's theory of planned behavior. It is all, I put it there because it is a useful framework which economists also use to help us tease out what, when we do modeling, what will help drive people to consume the arts. And so this is necessary because it helps then people who are running arts agencies, organizations like Hak-Peng and Sharon, to know how to segment customers and then how to nudge them to greater consumption, how to retain them. So while much can be discerned from customers' behavior, the challenge is how to understand the potential customers, because Hak-Peng and Aaron has all the data on people who come to either the museum or who attend SSO Singapore Symphony Orchestra performances. But what about people who potentially could come? What about people who are not so keen to come today, but given a certain set of circumstances, may possibly consider coming? So in domains such as environment and culture, where appreciation of the presence of this particular good, be it the environment or culture, is dominant, for Singaporeans, think Czech Java or Bukit Brown, you don't appreciate it until it's almost gone, right? The total economic value framework is a very useful one to help us frame studies to tease out such non-utility. It's called non-utility in the literature, but I call it utility unrevealed, because these people or these non-consumers don't know what they're missing yet. So what are the sources of non-use value? To use an example of a museum, since the most recent presentation I gave was at a museum economics conference. So I might not go to a museum. So use value is clear. So if you go to a museum, you get a direct value from it. But what if you had never gone to a museum and are not intending to go? It doesn't mean that you don't value the museum, because one, I might not go to the museum today, but I want the option of going to it sometime in the future. We call that option value. Bequest value is I might not want to go to the value, but I understand cognitively the value of it to my children and my descendants. So I want the museum to remain. Third is existence value. I just want the museum to exist just because I think every developed country should have a museum. There's also prestige value. I don't want my friends thinking Singapore is so backward, it has no heritage, no artifacts worth preserving, that there's no museum in Singapore. And finally, there's education value. I don't go to the museum, but I appreciate the education that the museum can bring to the community. So all these values can actually be priced using certain analytical methodologies called the contingent valuation and choice modeling. I'll come back to this later. So the basics, how we dissect demand and how we can think of the components or the determinants driving demand in order to help us gather evidence on understanding who should pay, or making the case for governments and philanthropists to help fund the arts and culture. So when well-functioning markets for cultural products and services exist, clearly it is the buyer who pays. There is no further need for the state to be involved in demand. Perhaps only from the supply side, if there is a conscious state decision, which is beyond the ambit of today's presentation, for there to have a national orchestra or national performing arts center for a national museum, or for funding local works. But for firms within the space of trying to address demand, the issue is how to maximize revenue, how to maximize attendance, or how to understand the profiles of people who are coming to your venues or your events. So data that can help you segment your customers. So the key challenge for people who are producing or providing services which have a clear market, then it is about understanding your customers and the various segments better. And typical sources of data would be your ticket purchases, lifestyle, I call it vehicles for getting lifestyle data, such as your credit card, big data, travel patterns, and increasingly social media, what people say, and even things like as simple as TripAdvisor bookings and all the related it's reviews on venues and destinations. Right? Surveys still play a part, but understand that surveys often have limitations because it's stated preference in contrast to earlier data on revealed preference. Of course, then there are behavioral experiments. I will share a little bit about the behavioral experiment later. So, example of price discrimination, using the case study of performances. So there are various ways that you can maximize revenue. So in order to, if it was important to you to reach out to students from underserved segments or from families that might not have the wherewithal at the moment to pay, then you practice a bit of price discrimination, charging those who value certain performances more in return for better seats in order to offer cheaper seats to then the 5 minutes left. Okay, to the rest of people. So things that people use are scaling the house. I mean, that's typical, dividing the house into different segments, Cat A, Cat B, or peak load pricing. You pay more for weekend performances compared to weekday performances. There's also targeted discounts, and there's dynamic pricing. So this is all well covered in the literature. So there's a recent study by Baldwin, Billet, and all in the Journal of Cultural Economics, where they try to come up with a model to help companies who want to try to maximize both, because usually, traditionally, the received wisdom was you could either maximize revenue or maximize attendance, but you can't do both. But in their model, they try to do, they come up with a model to try to do both. And they had some recommendations. We'll take this offline if anyone of you is interested in this particular study. All right, but what if markets do not exist or do not function well? I alluded to this earlier. So some would be left out of the consumption, and there is a state philosophy that these particular segments should not be left out. In this case, of public and merit goods, then the natural funders would be your government and the philanthropists. So the question now in these cases becomes not who pays, or how do we make the case for payment to be made? Because clearly the government and the philanthropists are there to provide funding if there is market failure, but how do we put the case of the arts and culture out there, that we are worth funding? Because, and remember the principle of scarcity, that whether you're a government, whether you're a philanthropist, whether you're a private individual, choices always have to be made. So why is the arts and heritage much worth funding much more than the sports, than community activities, than the poor families or the broken homes, right? So the challenge for me as a civil service researcher then is to develop alternative methods to try to understand and capture impact, the dreaded word. So this, again, I'm happy to share this. This is just called from, I think, one of the ICOM funded studies, and just talks about the different sources of value that you can use to try to model. So there would be intrinsic value, instrumental value, institutional value, your museum or your orchestra or your performing arts venue is doing important things. For the case of the Esplanade, they also train technical theatre people. So as an institution, it has value, right? And then there's also, I can't read my own typing, connecting value. When spaces bring people together, there's education value, experience value, and economic impact. And it's because all the related spending that goes on when you hire people to work in your venues and your organizations. I spoke on this earlier. So just coming back to this use and market value. So in the arts world, there are certain parts of it which already have data, right? So typically your art market, so there is no need for the government then to come in to fund anything. If someone's interested in a piece of art, then he pays whatever the market dictates. But if you were interested in trying to tease out, for example, the value to the Singapore Arts Festival or Singapore Art Museum, then these are the types of values, specific values that you work into your survey questions in order to capture the broad buckets that I spoke about earlier. So, for example, when I did the Singapore Arts Festival survey in 2006, I worked in questions asking people whether their experience at the Arts Festival made them proud of the festival as an icon for Singapore. So with the survey responses, then I built it into a modeling framework to explain their willingness to pay, which is the demand curve. So there are various non-market valuation methods that you can use to capture use values and non-use values. Okay, so just quickly going to case studies. So I've done one on the museum, National Museum previously. I think the paper out in the Journal of Cultural Economics. So understanding that the roles of museum is to educate. I put educate first rather than tourist destination first, to collect and present, interpret artifacts. And it is a cultural product in itself, because for us in Singapore, our museums are located in buildings which are part of our history, right? And so importantly, it's a tourist destination. So by again modeling the willingness to pay for a museum in order to prevent losing the museum, and under the second scenario, in order to enhance the museum, I put in the demographics of people, attitudes of people, and to understand how much people will be willing to pay, and collectively how much the museum is worth to society. Okay, so just quickly, so data, I have results on how much Singaporeans in general are willing to pay. In order not to lose the museum, average Singaporean is willing to pay $26 to $28 per year. Don't laugh at the amount. Multiply it over the millions of Singaporeans we have, and it's quite a substantial value of the museum, social value of the museum. I also are able to compare who's willing to pay more because I have people of different ages, and typically we see that people who, and because I compared it against Arts Festival and Singapore Biennale, there's some interesting results there. So the younger people are more happy to pay more for the Biennale, and it's in contrast with the museum. I don't know, because of the museum's image as something august and reserved for older people. This is back in 2006, don't kill me. And then in 2011, the Biennale was seen as something funky as contemporary. Right? So all these things affect people's willingness to pay. We can also tease out what personal characteristics determines willingness to pay, and whether different methods, asking people whether it's outright donation or whether they're willing to pay through tax, will also affect the demand for the thing. Right? So these are some quick conclusions from that particular study. The second type of study is when you are interested not just as the cultural product as a whole, but you're interested in particular features. I've done one on Esplanade, but I haven't written it up. So I used one that is an overseas study. It is the island of Sabah, so it is not our Malaysian Sabah, but it's a Dutch Caribbean island. And so what they were trying to understand is because it's got unique flora and fauna, right? And then, everywhere in the world, ecological ecosystem is under threat, so they wanted to understand whether tourists will be willing to pay different amounts to protect certain different things. And you can do that through asking people repeatedly what choices they would make. Okay, finally, just very quickly, something on social impact. So we piloted this study in the National Museum to understand what impacts what sort of value participating in a program, an arts program within a museum setting, when you have a group comprising both old people and young people. So the idea was also to understand whether intergenerational bonding happens better within an arts and a heritage setting. And the cases that we wanted to test were whether old people felt more happier or greater well-being, and the person who runs this is a psychologist, so he's got all these well-being constructs and instruments. So whether they're happier participating with other old people, whether young old people or elderly people or more senior people are happier participating with young people from their own family and young people of not outside their family, right? So the whole intergenerational passing on of values, communication thing that we want to test. Right? So this was the results of, oops, I think I've just stopped it. Yeah. So very quickly, so this was just my schematic to help us understand, what sort of, how do you want to collect data? So if from the individuals, you can divide them into two groups: people who are able to pay and unable to pay. If they're willing to pay, leave them alone. Just leave it to the agencies to collect data. If they're unwilling to pay, then if you think there's potential for outreach, for conversion to audienceship, then you might want to do things like experiments, discounts, giving discounts, experimenting with pay what you want, and trying bundling, and then collecting data on these. But if they're unable to pay, but they're willing to go, then there's a case to be made for philanthropy, and that's when researchers like me will come in to try to look at impact studies in order to help make the case advocacy. Yep. So that's pretty much what I have.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
I should say thank you.
Okay,
Clearly, I'm a fan of Haribo.
Okay, that was very insightful. I think Sharon helped us set the context in terms of broadening our view of the value of the arts and reminding us really when we talk about value, it's about this total economic value concept, and it's beyond monetary references, but really what is that non-use value that I think she's painted a very comprehensive picture for us. Okay, so next we have Mr. Aaron Seeto. Aaron is the director of the Museum and Modern and Contemporary Art in Nusantara, or in short, MACAN, right? The museum actually just celebrated its first anniversary in November, and it is the pioneering modern and contemporary art institution in Jakarta. Aaron comes with a vast experience as an advocate of advancing the goals of contemporary arts organizations, and he has experiences in Australia as a curatorial manager and the director of Sydney's groundbreaking 4A Center for Contemporary Asian Art. I just wanted to very quickly share this quote, you know, so I did a bit of homework last night, so Tangam, I did. And I found this quote by Aaron that I thought was particularly inspiring, where he said, "The reason why I became interested in art is actually because I had a great arts teacher. Deep down, when I think about it, it's education why I became interested in art. It is a great opportunity to engage with the public, and I look forward to facing the challenge on how Indonesians' broad and diverse population and audiences might engage with the art." So with that, I hand the time over to Aaron.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to take a slightly different tack. That was deeply impressive, though probably for a lot of the audience, data also is incredibly confusing. So I'm going. Hopefully, this is a little bit more of a case study. And that quote that you, how you introduced me in relation to education is actually probably somewhere integrated into this presentation. So. We celebrated our first anniversary in November. We're a private museum in Jakarta. And we have some very civic, a mission which revolves around a kind of civic responsibility to the Indonesian population. So the museum provides public access to a significant collection. We develop exhibitions. We have a program of talks and lectures, and education is fundamental to the vision of the foundation which governs our activities. So the concept of affordability is related to accessibility. And while economic sustainability of the museum's activities is an important consideration in our first few years of operations, the broader sustainability of our audiences and programs is similarly inseparable from the economic question. Museum MACAN is a private museum, but we consider our activities within the context of the public sphere. Jakarta's sizable population of 20 million people, its great religious, ethnic, and economic diversity, the prevalence of social media and digital engagement, and a city constrained by traffic and infrastructure has required the museum to consider carefully its understanding of what constitutes the public. The subject of today's session in the context of the whole conference theme points to interrelated terms: affordability, accessibility, and sustainability, with a direct question of who pays and what counts. The framing terms of the session relate to an economic ordering of cultural infrastructure, and I think it is worthwhile noting that there is an increasing desire amongst certain groups to rationalize civic engagement through this particular prism. I want to address these questions in a slightly more oblique way, to turn our conversation to some of the core civic responsibilities of our museum to ensure that questions of accountability are at the service of the broader role that culture plays amongst our constituencies. These cannot always be easily rationalized economically, and there must still be a role for knowledge building, for history and human interconnection within the museum experience. So my understanding is that diversity and audiences are sites for critical engagement. But having said that, as a museum, the issue of financial sustainability is at the forefront of our minds. I think one of the things that really that came out for me yesterday is that the context for the public and private are constantly shifting from territory to territory. What happens here in Singapore is completely different to the experience that others are facing throughout Southeast Asia. And that's particularly the case in Indonesia, where there really is no public support for the arts. Philanthropy is at a very nascent stage, and fundraising, well, is difficult because of all of those things. So Indonesia is complex. It's the fourth most populous country with over 250 million people. It is ethnically and religiously diverse with extremes of wealth and poverty, and constrained by a lack of infrastructure. So answering the question of who pays and what counts needs to be considered in the context of the specific demographic situation in which we find ourselves, modulated by the 21st century opportunities provided to us through technology and social media. And these are some of the things that we'll explore a little bit through this presentation. So who pays? I would like to answer the first question of the panel's frame in a very succinct way. Museum MACAN is a private museum. We were established in 2017. We were developed through private capital, through a foundation, and we house a collection on long-term loan of around 800 works of modern and contemporary art that has been collected over a 25-year period by the founder of the museum. The museum is the first of its kind in Indonesia, and though Indonesia has many museums, our focus on international modern and contemporary art, our modern facilities set us apart. Our focus on education through modern it also makes us unique in this landscape, as well as our global outlook, which bridges the activities of Indonesia with the world as part of this broader strategy to stimulate cultural exchange. Our foundational principles, we have really three parts of our immediate vision. One was to actually build a museum in Indonesia to facilitate access to art and culture by the public. We wanted to increase the quality of art education and provide opportunities for art appreciation in a country where infrastructure is lacking. And the third one is really around that cultural exchange, to imagine a 21st century museum which is globally relevant, but also talking nationally, but also related and connected throughout the region. But what counts? What counts is a more difficult question to answer. We're private, and we're acutely aware that our activities function within this public sphere, as I've said. We take our exhibitions and education seriously. We take our professional staffing seriously. We have ongoing and regular programs, and we also have a long-term view for the museum. But one of my challenges as the director is that as a not-for-profit organization, I have to make the museum sustainable. Not only in the context of our audiences, but also financially. I think one of the things that when people see the private museum, that they see the see the founder of the museum without actually realizing that I have to actually raise money in order to sustain what we do, separate from the support that we get from the foundation. But I wanted to firstly start with, to remind ourselves of the principle of what museums actually achieve in our societies. This is something which I cobbled together from a number of other places. And I think it's important for us to remember that museums provide intellectual, aesthetic and emotional experiences which give visitors insight into their histories, themselves and the world around them. So in a country like Indonesia, with its population and diversity, creating opportunities to encourage empathy has been also one of the very important foundations for our activities, not just in terms of the building of the museum, but also in the future programming. Museums, I've slightly shifted around the question to who counts. Because museums require people as much as they require art. And we should be aware that who it is that we mean when we talk about people. When we look at museums in many parts of the world, and we may extrapolate this to the experience here in Singapore, and there was the great presentation yesterday that I think that really looked at those inequalities. History, the history of museums is also a history of social class and exclusion. We can point to the representation of the indigenous, women, the handling of race and migration in the narratives of museum collections, to understand that maybe the definition of the public is not easily reconciled to the reality of society. Of course, the practice of artists and the current practice of museums works hard to disassemble these silent institutional privileges. It is fair to say that museums nowadays are well aware of the diversity of their publics and actively engage with, trying to engage with the need to be reflective and in some cases to revise the inequities of their structure. As much as this is a challenge that is inherent within the history of museum culture itself, it is very much a contemporary conversation about the need and desire for museums, and all institutions for that matter, to be diverse and embrace more expansive definitions of the contemporary public. I think that perhaps it's the experience in Australia where I was born and where I grew up. Issues of diversity are not, and audience development shouldn't be treated as KPIs. That they're actually real situations that affect real people. And part of the commentary yesterday with our keynote speaker in terms of the question about hiring and being colorblind, well, I actually have a few difficulties with that in the sense that in terms of the programming for museums, we can seek to be diverse in our outreach, but if we do not change the structure, if we do not change staffing arrangements or the governance, then we simply replicate all of those violence, all of that violent history from generation to generation. There is a lot of work that needs to be done within museums to change governance structures. So recently, I was in New York on a international program with other curators and museum people, where, of course, diversity is such an important question and conversation that is happening with, in the context of management. But one thing that came out of these conversations in New York is that, yes, we can strive to have 50% representation by women, but we also need to go further to understand, well, how many of those diverse constituencies control budgets? So we need to delve deeper to change some of those internal structural issues. I put up a map of Indonesia because even though we're a very short flight from here in Singapore, I think that maybe a lot of people may not know where Indonesia is. And this is actually something that my staff constantly tell me when they go overseas and they study, that there are questions about, do you have electricity? What is what's, there is a poor understanding, I think, of our neighbors within Southeast Asia. So I work in a country of nearly 263 million people. It's the fourth most populous country in the world. It's young people and people of working age as a group is larger than its senior and child demographic. So as a population, it has extraordinary potential. And I think that this may be different from a lot of other Western contexts. We're not necessarily dealing with an aging population. We're not necessarily dealing with that challenge of presenting Shakespeare that came up yesterday. We're actually needing to engage with a much younger profile. We have a massively growing middle class, so 1 in 5 Indonesians belong to this middle class, and it makes us the world's 4th largest middle class with just shy of 20 million households in 2016, and these numbers are projected to continually rise until 2030. I heard somewhere that it will double within that time period. Communications is forecasted to be the fastest growing category. Internet and social media become really important. We have 130 million active social media users, and this grows 10% each year. 350 million SIM card subscribers, which illustrates that a great capacity within that kind of digital framework. So Indonesia craves communication, and I think what our experience in Jakarta, because we have such terrible traffic, that social media becomes a very important tool to understand what's going on within the city itself. So this is who we are. I mean, this is I'm just going to quickly show you what we look like before we discuss a little bit further. This is we have about 7,000 square meters within the entire museum facility, and about 2,500, nearly 3,000 square meters of exhibition space. Our idea within the programming is not only to present Indonesian work, but also to create collaborations overseas. So this is an image of a collaboration recently that Yo-Yo Kusama, Life is the Heart of the Rainbow, which was a collaboration with the Queensland Art Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, and also the National Gallery of Singapore. Education is really important because we know that when we did the market research, that there was really only 1% of Indonesians who had engaged with culture. And we need to work really hard in order to build that better understanding. So in our first year, well, actually in our first 9 months, we welcomed over 350,000 visitors. And this included close to 80,000 children and students, as well as 109 school groups. So in terms of who pays for that, well, we were very lucky to be able to secure a partner, a corporate partner, UOB, who have helped us to underwrite all of our schools programs. And we were recently recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 world's greatest places in 2018. It's not something that we courted, it's not something that we were even looking out for, but I think that it goes to show that there is a much bigger interest outside of the region in what happens within the region. So our first exhibition, and just to give you an indication, an indication of our types of programming, we've done, currently we have done 3 exhibitions. Our first exhibition last November was a collection show that really presented about 200 years of both Indonesian and international modern and contemporary art that looked at the role, looked at art history as, Indonesian art history as the kind of core spine at moments when there were international connectivity. So right from the colonial period, through the independence period, through globalization, right into the contemporary. We opened, and as I said, the exhibition, the collaboration with the National Gallery of Singapore and the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art, of Yo-Yo Kusama. Kusama is someone who is very deep within our collection. We have quite a number of her works, and you know, it's fascinating because so many of my peers from overseas see Kusama, exhibitions like Kusama as blockbusters where you can have almost have a guaranteed audience. Well, that's true, but one of the things that's really important for us when we make these big exhibitions is to ensure that that educational context, that art historical context, is very firm and very deep within the exhibition. And one of the great things about this particular project is that it showed almost seven decades of work, and you were able to really delve in and understand where some of those concepts of hers came from. So on the opening night, we had a number of young painters, young artists coming up to me and said, you know, we understood Kusama was really about dots. We've seen her work represented in all kinds of places, but I never realized that she was actually interested in painting. So, you know, the opportunity for a young artist, or anyone for that matter, to stand in front of a work of art and to be touched in only the way that art can do that, I think is very, very important. So currently we have 3 projects on. We have a survey exhibition of the Indonesian artist Aramayani. Aramayani is one of the first, well, maybe a wave of Indonesian, Southeast Asian artists who began to exhibit globally in the late 90s and 2000s. So her work is probably better known outside of Indonesia than it is inside, or at least it's better seen outside than it is inside. Because up until our museum, it would have been very difficult for artists to mount major survey exhibitions like hers. So when we purchased a work of hers last year, which is a very important work. I don't have a slide, unfortunately, of a painting she made in 1994. It's a work called Lingayoni, and it has an image of a penis and a vagina, and it talks about the kinds of the cultural syncretization that has occurred within Indonesia over many, many centuries. This work in 1994 resulted in the exhibition that she was presenting it in to be closed down, and then she fled Indonesia because of there was a political uproar that resulted. She thought that this work had been destroyed and that she didn't know where it was. And we found it and we secured it for the museum. And one of the things that she said when we put it on display, she said to the founder of the museum that, "I'm so proud that you've been able to bring this work back to Indonesia." It had been outside of the country. Because I had never thought that I'd be able to present my work, important works, to the Indonesian public. And I think I retell that story because it says a lot about the greater role that the museum plays, not just for artists, but also to be able to tell those important stories. Anyway, I'm going to quickly move through. We have because I really wanted it to talk about social media. And I'm sorry, I'm going to read from something else that I have done. I mean, for a museum like ours, I would say that who wants to be responsive and also engage with audiences, social media is very important. But I also think that it needs to be done in a way where we can present social media hand in hand with opportunities to learn and experience art in real time. So somewhere down the track, someone who is engaged with us online will want to come and explore a work of art that will have seen on screen. Maybe for those of you who don't live either in the region, social media in Indonesia is crazy. I mean, you have those demographics there. It is the main way in which people share information and that they communicate with each other. But also I think that there's something very seductive about the potential for social media to disrupt. And so returning to one of my early ideas about privilege, what goes along with large populations such as Indonesia is a great variety of access to information and education. So some people have that access and some people do not. In a developing country, social media is cheap, it's quick and efficient, and can unify a hugely complex, multi-ethnic and multi-racial society. Social media creates entry points, and of course you have to sift through the amount of information, but this also goes to the fact that we need to build better critical thinking within education so that kids are able to better understand what they're looking at. Social media also creates lists and indexes, which for curators and also art historians, this is very, very important. So where you have little access to information, where there are very few libraries or few books, when you don't actually get to see pictures in the flesh, where there are no art magazines, social media can allow you to point to it and for others to highlight their interests and to join a discussion or to put forward dissenting views. And despite accusations of banality, which are often applied to these social networks, social media can create criticality. So the curator, Lauren Cornell from the New Museum, was quoted in the LA Times talking about social media. And she says that it's changed criticism. Criticism has migrated to sites like Facebook. Artists shouldn't be making works just to get likes. They should be thinking about generating conversation. I think about this for myself. I am not a curator, so people can just give me a thumbs up. So social media can also break down elite communities. It allows those with limited social franchises in the day-to-day world to articulate their experiences and make visible the things which elites fail to recognize and see. In the hands of artists and the artistic community, it is more than powerful. Social media can be transformational. Before we launched the museum, many people were asking, in the context of a lack of museum infrastructure in Indonesia, did we even have a general audience appreciation for art? And our answer, based on the experience to date, is that there is. It is young, it is technologically connected, and our audiences are curious and thirsty for all kinds of cultural conversations, and that they also share widely and broadly their experiences and expectations online. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaron. I think very comprehensive, but I think we'll leave some time for Q&A where we're able to go into deeper conversations about how social media and access also is, I think, a huge part of this thing when we talk about, who counts, right? And I like the point where when he started talking about the social media and he took out his phone and he wasn't referring to a paper script anymore. Okay, with that, I'm going to welcome Hak-Peng as our third and final speaker this morning. Many of us are very familiar with Hak-Peng. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Singapore Symphony Group, which manages the Singapore Symphony Orchestra and its family of orchestras and choruses. Hak-Peng's involvement with the orchestra began over 10 years ago, where he began working with the orchestra on a pro bono basis, and then subsequently appointed as the Deputy Chairman of the company, where he led a team that integrated the National Youth Orchestra to the group. His professional focus has been on value creation through strategy and leadership. And Hak-Peng enjoys participating in orchestras, and I'll leave you with a fun fact that he actually used to play the tuba with the Singapore National Youth Orchestra. Hak-Peng, please.
Thank you very much, Serene. I always feel very awkward when I hear this overly generous introduction. Today, though, I am bringing a different part of my background to sharing this question about who pays and what counts for the arts. I'm going to bring my two experiences. One is that I was trained as an engineer, and that the other is I spent a long time doing due diligence on companies before investors invested in them. And we're going to talk a little bit about numbers today so that I can complement the theory that Sharon has provided. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the experiences that we are trying to create, and so therefore, who are the people who count, which was the same question that Aaron had asked. Let me start with an introduction of our group. We are here to create memorable experiences for people in Singapore. The Arts Council and the Ministry of Culture had a wonderful strategic idea about 5 to 6 years ago to combine various classical music entities into the same company. And so through the Singapore Symphony Orchestra and the affiliated groups, we try to spread the love for music, which was the original intent and mission when the company was created in 1979. And we will be celebrating our 40th year of spreading this love for music in January. And with the various evolutionary factors, we have also grown with other orchestras in the world to include the nurturing of talent as a very important part of this mission. And with also the growth of Singapore and hitting past the 50-year-old point, we also want to engage with and enrich our diverse communities here in Singapore, both from the communities of audiences and also the communities of musicians that we feel we are a very part of in this ecosystem. So we have 3 different types of businesses in the company. The first is the orchestral business, which comprises the main symphony orchestra, which is the only full-time professional orchestra here in Singapore, and also the National Youth Orchestra, which is comprised of 180 students that we train every year. The choral segment has the volunteer chorus, the amateur chorus, which is our way of engaging with adults who want to sing in the choral tradition and the symphonic choral tradition in particular. The youth choir is a new group that we formed because we found that there was a gap in terms of the offerings for people who wanted to sing symphonic works. And we have the Singapore Symphony Children's Choir, which was started 12 years ago as a way for young children to start singing. Finally, we run a chamber music program at the Victoria Concert Hall to cater for young musicians who want to perform and also for people who want to experience music in a more intimate setting. And one of the big arms that we have is that we are the Singapore representative for the classical music examinations run by the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. It is quite a wide mandate, and I'm going to focus specifically on the Singapore Symphony Orchestra because I think that there are a lot of interesting case studies that we have. The first being to reference off Sharon's point about the kinds of goods that we provide. And if we wanted to talk about the goods provided by every single one of these entities, I think we could write an entire economics textbook on it. So we're just going to talk about the SSO. The SSO puts on anything from 120 to 130 performances a year, inclusive of the performances that are combined with the chorus and choirs, etc. So this is the full view that we have. We've also thrown in a few of the additional youth activities that we do just to give you a bigger picture on it. So what you see here is that we have segmented vertically, that we have sort of the core concerts that the SSO provides. In here already, I think we have two different types of goods. So one type of good is the merit good that Sharon was talking about. And another type of good that we have that Sharon didn't have time to talk about, which we have gone through evolving relationships with, is that we now fully accept that from an economic theory perspective, we provide a luxury good as well, and those are the gala concerts that we have. We struggled with this because of the question of accessibility. Is the fact that you have an orchestra immediately the fact that you have an elitist institution? And after many, many years of thinking, we have come to the very firm conclusion that it is not an elitist institution. We provide gala concerts as a luxury good because people pay. And it is one of the ways that we can recover some of the costs that we spend. So what we try to do is that we try to make this proportion small, and therefore we try to keep luxury goods at about 20% of the product line that we offer. We also have an audience development function in the orchestra, and this is split into three groups. So in gray, we have the chamber concerts that we do. That's definitely a merit group. We have the education and pops concerts that we do. That's kind of mixed. I think it's more of a standard good more than anything else. These that are colored in red are very clearly a demand meets supply, therefore find equilibrium price kind of product. And then we have the free concerts. So I'm going to talk about all the free concerts that are in yellow. We do about 40 of them a year. And these are public goods for sure. And one of the issues with public goods, as you know, is that you always encounter the tragedy of the commons. And we struggle with that a lot as well. But I think it's important that we have public goods that are free because we play a national function in terms of the spreading of the love of music. So that's about 40 concerts a year. Who comes to these concerts and who counts? So if we look at the subscription and gala concerts, I think we will have some numbers to show later, but we would consider this to be quite a wide variety of people. There are a couple of concerts in particular that we also pay attention to accessibility. For example, one of the concerts that we did in August was our National Day concert. Because it was a showcase of Singaporean music, we wanted to make sure that it reached as many people as possible. We did this through live streaming on social media, which caters to people who are not willing to pay for the concert or not wanting to come all the way from different parts of town into the city to attend them. We also had the entire concert signed by a sign language interpreter so that our hearing impaired audience members could enjoy the concert as well. We participate and we hold our concerts in two wonderful venues, the Victoria Concert Hall and the Esplanade, both of which are top of their game in terms of accessibility for mobility related types of access. And One of the other angles that we've experimented with is working with children in the audience who are from the ADHD spectrum and having to learn and adjust our settings for lighting, for sound, and the kind of volume of music that the musicians play to make sure that it is something that allows for the children to relax and enjoy themselves. So from an accessibility point of view, I think that as a national orchestra, the answer to the question of who counts is that everyone must count. And we want everyone in Singapore to be able to enjoy music, and you can enjoy music at every point of the spectrum, from being a fanatic about classical music, which we have many, all the way to people who draw what Sharon had referred to as prestige value for the good of having an orchestra, and also for the education value. So we find that one of the biggest participants and as audience in our education concerts are parents who do not themselves enjoy classical music on a day-to-day basis, but feel that their children should attend these free concerts that the National Orchestra provides because of this education value that they see music as giving and the arts and culture as giving to the next generation. When you look at the subscription concerts, so the standard good, not the gala luxury good, we have a number of data points that we are quite proud of. So there's an error on the left-hand chart. It's not nationality, this is by residency. And we pay attention to this number because of the question of who pays. We, of course, as a national orchestra, want to have a lot of people who are resident in Singapore to be attending our concerts, but we also know that the kinds of artists that we present are international level artists, and therefore the tourist crowd is also quite important. So thanks very much to SISTIC, and I know Joe is here, who provided the data. We can now track, and we know that our tourist percentage has gone from 5%, which was in 2014, to now hovering at about 10%. And this is through efforts that we do working with concierge associations in Singapore and so on to make recommendations. Within the Singapore, the SG bar, we also take a look and pay attention to age. And this is one of the points that we are proudest of. So if you look at the chart on the right, more than 50% of our audience are below the age of 45. And the bulk of the people who purchase our tickets are, in fact, from the 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 range. This was picked up by a classical music journalist about 6 months ago, and he posed the question to his audience whether any orchestra in the world, any other orchestra in the world has a profile that looks like this, and the answer so far seems to be no. So this makes the audience of the Singapore Symphony Orchestra the youngest in the world, and we're very proud of that. Who pays for these concerts? This is what our income statement looks like. We are primarily funded by government grants and government-related grants. So about 65% of our income comes from the National Arts Council. Thank you very much to the National Arts Council. And also the Totalizator Board, now known as the Tote Board Singapore. And then we have quite a large amount that comes from donations. So I've put 3 kinds of donations that we have. We have one special category for Temasek because nobody can reach that level of donations, and we are always so grateful for the Temasek Foundation Nurtures, they have so many different funds with different mandates, and they have put our fund, the arts and culture funding, into the Nurtures bucket, which is absolutely in line with the mission that we have. We have in-kind donations through our media sponsors, our media partners, our hotel partners and airline partners, and then we have cash donations from corporates and individuals. We get much less than I would like from ticketing, so it's hovering at about 5.5% to 6% of our income now. It used to be at about 3%. And we also receive some income from fees. So what does this mean in terms of the average concert goer? So it means that a typical concert ticket that you have here in the Esplanade, for example, which is the one where we did the math, a ticket would cost $500 to us to present the concert. From this $500, the National Arts Council and Tote Board will account for about $350 on average. And so that leaves behind $150. A large part of this is taken up by private donors, and that's the yellow bar that you see. So the average concert goer would pay about $38 for the ticket. So what this means is that every one of you really needs to come to an SSO concert, because we are by far the best way for you to get your tax money back. So please come and attend a concert. You know for sure that it's very worth it. In fact, if you come for a gala concert, even though we treat it as a luxury good, the amount of subsidy for the lowest seats are much higher than this. And why is that so? Because we reserve 2 categories of tickets for prices below $30. And students, for example, if you were a single student and you wanted to buy a ticket for yourself, the ticket would cost for most concerts $15, for some concerts $10 Singapore. So for our British friends, that would be £3 and £5. And if you come in a group of 4, or you come through your school, you are at $7.50, which is hovering at £3 most of the time. And there is no better way for your children to get your tax money back than to come for an SSO concert. This is also made possible because of companies like Tote Board, who support ticket subsidies a lot, and also companies like corporations like Swire, who do that. So one of the things that we always try to do is we always try to figure out how do you strike this balance between filling the hall, which is quite important for us, and also ensuring that we can have people pay for the arts, because one of the philosophies that we have about spreading the love for music is not just love for music that is free, but that art is valuable and that you need to pay for it. So we pay a lot of attention to understanding price elasticity, and we do elasticity analysis, I think, every 3 months, just to try to understand what's going on. And Singapore is by far one of the strangest markets when it comes to paying for the arts. So let's walk through what this slide is trying to say. So this is looking at, on the horizontal axis, we have the different price points for our tickets, and we have quantity of tickets purchased on the vertical axis. So this is a standard demand curve axis, but a non-standard demand curve. So a standard demand curve would want you would want to see a very high demand at low prices on the left, and coming down asymptotically, I think, to much lower demand at a higher price. But you can see that the Singapore market behaves quite strangely. Regardless of whether you take the blue line, which is only the ticket price line, or the full willingness to pay line, which is with the cystic fee. Joe, it's too high, the cystic fee, just to let you know. But anyway, you can see that the cystic fee shifts the pricing by quite a lot. However, one thing good about the cystic fee is that we can also learn something about consumer behavior here. So you can see that there is a strange behavior, because the cheaper the tickets are, it doesn't mean that you get more people buying the ticket. And we can even see this because we do so many experiments with the way we cut our seats, and different concerts, we use them to experiment differently. And the recent concert we have, which was sold out, where we played the New World Symphony, We opened in the last 2 weeks the choir gallery behind the orchestra, and we have our best-looking cellist as the soloist. So we were debating how to price these seats, right? Because people want to see his face. They may not want to see his back. So we decided that we'll open 2 rows at $48, 2 rows at $38, 2 rows at $28 with a few seats at $15. So the $15 tickets were sold out because it was students buying it, which we were very happy about. $28 tickets did not move. $48 tickets in the front, half of them sold. And the $38 tickets, which were in the middle, neither in the front nor the back, were sold out immediately. And this is corroborated here with the highest peak being at the $38 ticket point. It has been at $38 for the last 10 years, so that means inflation doesn't even come into the picture. And basically, who pays what? Singaporeans pay $38. And that is the price that moves the most tickets. And when you look at willingness to pay for donations, it's also not an interesting picture or encouraging picture, but there are very, very slow movements. So if you take a look at the National Arts Council data, that kind of gives you the benchmark of how many people are willing to donate to you and how much you can get. You can see that the proportion of philanthropy money going to the arts is really, really small. It's that yellow bar right at the bottom, and much smaller than social welfare, health, and education. But the encouraging thing is that from 2015 to 2016, we were quite excited by the latest numbers that came out. It had gone from 3.8% to 6%, so that's encouraging. And that if you look at compounded annual growth, it has the highest growth so far because it starts from such a small base to begin with. So if you look at a 5-year growth rate, it's 46%. So theoretically speaking, we should be able to double this in about 3 years. And Sharon and the NEC team will work on increasing philanthropy to the arts. And by 2020, we want to see 12%. Then maybe there's hope for all of us. So I will leave you with these numbers and these thoughts. I think that for us, who pays and what counts is that as a national orchestra, we want to reach as many people as possible. And that also means that we want as many people to pay what they're willing to pay for the arts as possible. And for those that can't pay, we are really happy to use our government grants to provide free concerts. And it's a wonderful statistic for us. When we perform for free at the Botanic Gardens, we hit 10,000 people coming to our concerts. We understand from our friends at the Botanic Gardens that it's still the highest attendance concert in their Shaw Foundation stage every year. So this continues to be encouraging for us that we're doing the right thing. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Hak-Peng. I think my main takeaway was the point when he said it's who counts and everyone must count. I think we have to remember that always, and I think in everything that we do. I'm sorry that we only have a couple of minutes left for Q&A. I will eat into a little bit of your tea break time. But what we're going to do is we're going to invite questions from the floor. We've got a couple of questions here on Pigeonhole as well. And what I will do is I will actually pick out the more generic questions. The specific ones I'll leave you to speak to the panelists directly over tea. But first of all, opening up to the floor, if there are any questions from anyone. No? Okay. Then just reminded me we've got 1 minute to go. No, 5 minutes? Okay. Okay, maybe the first question then, I think I'm going to bring this up, is talking about the line in, you know, where do we draw the line in offering free admission to enable accessibility and yet still building up a discerning audience that will pay? I think this is a question that we speak a lot about, right? So when you have free events, you then don't cultivate a paying audience. Hak-Peng?
So I think there are two ways to do this. The first is that as a arts provider, as a company, I think we need to have a philosophy behind what we do, and we need to understand why we offer free programs and why we offer paid programs that build a discerning audience. So for us, we have gone through that thinking. I shared a little bit of that. I won't repeat the philosophy behind it, but we do have a numerical number to guide us. So typically what we try to do is we offer 30 programs that are standard classical and paid, and we offer another 10 programs that are more family oriented and paid, and we offer about 10 programs that are free. So that's kind of the ratio that we've gone for. The other angle is that we also need to have a philosophy about why we offer this free program and where we are supposed to take these audience members in terms of a journey. And the journey we want them to take is that the best appreciation for the arts and music is in a world-class concert hall, and Singapore offers a few world-class concert halls, the most world-class concert hall being here, and this is the end point of the journey. So what we try to do is we try to educate in our free concerts that the experience that they have in a free concert outdoors is one kind of experience with burgers for picnics, but there are also alternate and more wonderful experiences that you can have back in the concert hall, and we try to draw people there.
I might just quickly unpick the question, because I don't know if I entirely agree with the division between because you can pay, that you are somehow have the ability to be more discerning. I think that I think we need to interrogate this type of attitude. Because something is free or because something is popular doesn't necessarily preclude it from being important or transformational. I think that if we're only looking at this really underlines some worrying attitudes towards access, I think.
Okay, maybe we'll take the next one. This one has just been upvoted quite a bit, so I'll actually put this one on. Okay, 1 second, sorry. About access, this question about access, and I think this is a very specific question to the museums. And how I read this is probably when people say, oh, okay, if I'm going to take my family to a show or to the museum for that matter, it's more than just the ticket price, right? Because you typically would then organize a night where you take them out, then you've got transport, and you've kind of got to feed them, and then and all that. So the question is then, how can we make these spaces or these experiences, I think, more affordable and accessible at the same time? Though bearing in mind that Sharon did share the statistic earlier that cost is actually not one of the considerations for those people who are not attending. It's actually about time, but I think the question about, the money that you put into every outing has to be answered as well.
Okay, I'm going to jump in on this. Does this turn on? Okay, I'm going to jump in on this, not to address how to make it more welcoming, because that's the purview of Aaron and Hak-Peng, but just to say from the population survey on the arts, whether people feel uncomfortable, they're not attending because they feel uncomfortable or out of place, that's only 6% of people who didn't attend, or 3% of the population. Out of 100 people, 3 people say they're not comfortable going to any of these arts and cultural venues. Right. So I'm just a data person. So how to make people comfortable, that's Hak-Peng and Aaron's part. I think Hak-Peng tries to do it by, I don't know, moving slowly people from bumps on grass to bumps on seats within the venues. The Botanic Gardens, SSO runs this Concert in the Park series, which is hugely popular. And I think Singaporeans like their flip-flops and their shorts and all that. I suppose the day that Hak-Peng allows them to come to his gala concerts in flip-flop and shorts would be the thing.
So actually we do. This is something that we are still spend a lot of time thinking about. All our gala concerts are held here at the Esplanade, and what we have often struggled with, and we need to apply a certain philosophy to what we do, is issues around age limits for children, especially children who tend to be a little bit rowdy, and also a dress code. And I'm not sure that we've fully made the experience welcome for people from different backgrounds. But first of all, I think what we try to think as a philosophy is that everybody has a love for music, and they're coming because of this love for music. I spend a lot of time at concerts in our Circle 3 and Circle 2 audiences, with the audiences up there. I get tickets up there sometimes just to see what kind of experience they go through. There are a couple of things we are quite proud about. There are a couple of things that we still have to figure out with the Esplanade what we want to do. So things we're proud about. There's no dress code for an SSO concert. We've never had one. We're a national orchestra. And if you go to Circle 3 and Circle 2, you'll see a lot of people who are very comfortable in flip-flops as well. I have tons of criticism about this, but as a company, we have to be welcoming and therefore not be exclusive by how people dress. The second thing is that people who buy tickets in Circle 3 and Circle 2, they tend to buy fewer tickets per transaction, so they tend to come alone, more than they come with a group of people, because to buy a bulk of tickets, you need to have a bit more spending power to buy 2 tickets at one go or 3 tickets at one go to have companions to come for the arts. What we have tried to do, and hasn't really kicked off, is we tried to introduce this idea of meet a friend and come to a concert and hang out. Doesn't really work. We haven't figured out why. Another thing that they experience is that if you come to Circle 3 and 2, the bars are empty because it's a commercial venture and you can't make money selling alcohol in the bars, so the bars are closed. This means that if you come and sit in Circle 3 for intermission, you actually don't have a food and drink option. And if you're starving, it means you need to run down the stairs, run somewhere within the Esplanade. Most affordable food and drinks is probably Toast Box and 7-Eleven, and then run your way back within the 20-minute intermission to make sure that you line your stomach with something. So we're still thinking a lot about these issues, but I think we first and foremost need to have a way of thinking, right? And the way of thinking, it must be that we cannot let artificial social restrictions be the barrier to people attending the arts.
Just another 2 more points occurred to me as Hak-Peng was speaking. First was we were actually also trying to understand vibe and what people get out of venues. And so this will be a research study that we'll be doing with some NUS. Some of you might know her, Professor Audrey Yue. She wants to do that sort of mapping of our civic district, which tends to be more august, and compare that with our Bras Basah Bugis district, which is a little more funky, and see whether people are comfortable with these places or the cultural institutions within these places. I might also add somewhat, not completely facetiously, that Singaporeans are quite pragmatic, actually, and I don't think they are deterred by the augustness of the buildings. I remember once Jaya from NHB telling me that there was a spike in museum attendance at, was it Sam? And that was because it was a rainy day and people went in to take, it's just next to the road or something. So it's just a matter of moving them from that lobby where they took shelter to enjoying the exhibits. I myself think really it's not the building that might deter people, it's sometimes the very serious-looking ushers and bouncers, I call them, right? The door bitches that somewhat, yeah, it's like somewhat scary. So that's the bit that we have to get across, yeah.
Well, from our experience, it's something that we have to work on very hard. Because I think there are much bigger differences between the lower socioeconomic classes here and in Indonesia. I mean, I think that the reality is we're not probably going to attract those audiences. But we do have a long-term view. So how we will do this for the future is through education. You know, we send our education teams out to schools. So we've got a program where my team goes out to only state schools to introduce teachers, especially, to the museum. We also bring the teachers into the museum, so it's not that's where also the barrier is as well. That if they can create that kind of safe learning environment and feel comfortable within the museum, that they're also going to want to bring their kids in. And we also have created space for children and their families, so that there's a what we've called the children's art space. It's a commissioned area where it's really about trying to demystify some of the bigger concepts in what's going on inside the museum. But having said that, we're also starting from a very low base, in the sense that there is no real there's no real expectation about what can be done in a museum. So a lot of our social media campaigns have really been about, you know, not touching and demystifying. We don't have those. I think the psychological barriers are very different. Yeah.
I actually think this actually leads very nicely into this particular question, where they were asking, you know, so how do you actually determine, in terms of what sort of education programs you have, and how do you determine who pays, especially as a private museum? Yeah.
So we've structured our education programs between those who can pay and those who can't pay. We offer public education and public programs free with entry, and that we do a lot of weekend events, so that those who are interested and want to learn more can learn more. But in terms of our core education program, who pays for it? Well, we have a partnership with UOB, and they came on very early to underwrite all of our education programs. What they pay for is the commissions in the children's art space. So twice a year, we have an artist who comes in. They also pay for our outreach. So that's my education team going to state schools, and we've set specific KPIs about how many children we have to engage with. They also pay for what we call our sponsored school visits. So that's schools coming into the museum, and we go through, there's a checklist that we have in terms of, it's not just about giving free access, it's about also, well, what is going to be the ongoing impact? Does the school have an ongoing interest in teaching art? Like, you know, is there the capacity within the school itself to do that? So that it's probably one of the areas that we've spent the most time thinking about. But in terms of who pays and who doesn't pay, it's actually about who can pay and who can't pay.
And if there's any area in which you want to make the case for state and philanthropic funding, education programs really useful. Because number one, Singapore data shows that a person who has been exposed to the arts and culture in childhood is three times as likely as an average person to be a lifelong supporter and goer to the arts.
Okay, I'm just going to open up to the floor again to see if there is any questions from anyone. No, then we're into our last 5 minutes. So I think I would just bring up this particular question about dynamic pricing. I think we were having this conversation on the sidelines yesterday as well. Is this something that, you know, we think that might actually work for your organizations? This question about dynamic pricing, you know, so if I go to one show, then I get a discount off the other, like what the airlines do, you know. But I think it's not about optimizing attendance rather than revenue, but I think it's really about the both of them. Actually, yeah.
It's actually something that we've spoken about very recently within within the museum. One of the challenges that we had was we've got limited ways to communicate dynamic pricing. So, you know, that's the biggest. Even if we could find the model to do it, I think the biggest barrier is how do we communicate it. I think an airline is completely different because you kind of you already expect it. I think that the expectations of audiences buying tickets to see an exhibition are going to be different. I mean, in very basic ways, you have dynamic pricing for movie tickets. You know, a difference in price for weekdays versus weekends, and maybe that's something that could be developed, but it's not something that we're going to do in the near future.
Yeah, I put it out there in my slides as well as a consideration. And typically, this suggestion I think came from an American consultant. Americans make you pay everything. The consultant did caution that for arts organizations, the possible negative side effects when you enter this world is very disgruntled customers who want to know why they are paying so much more for just that museum visit. I don't know why people just have that attitude towards culture. And increased staff time to both constantly monitor prices and handle customers' concerns. I mean, this time is so much better spent, I suppose, doing outreach and other things. And you want them to just, so that's...
So I mean, just sorry to... our ticket price is equivalent of about 10 Sing dollars, which, and the feedback that we get is, oh my gosh, it's so cheap, and oh my gosh, I can't bring my family. So we're you know, I mean, I think that if we were to think about dynamic pricing, we would probably overlay some kind of socioeconomic frame over it rather than time.
For us, I think the answer is yes. So we do dynamic pricing. The only thing that is challenging is the operationalizing of it. So for every concert, we do a demand-based adjustment of the prices. It's a little bit manual right now, but I understand from Joe that eventually SISTIC will think about having a layover that allows us to do it more automatically. It is to optimize attendance and revenue, and most people think of dynamic pricing as dropping off prices, but the SSO raises prices. And there are some concerts where after the initial group of affordable tickets for students have already gone, the rest of the tickets are only the more expensive tickets left. An example of this was the recent Final Fantasy concert that we did, which is there's a cult. I didn't know this cult existed in Singapore, but they were all there, and I saw them. They looked human, but I'm not sure. So we sold 2 shows. We sold the first show first at a standard rate, $15 up to about $88. And then that was sold out, and so all the students had bought their tickets. The second show we opened with only 48, 68, and 88. There were no more cheap tickets left, and it moved very fast, so we closed 48. And we left only 68. The 68 started moving, so we closed 68. We converted all the 68 seats to 88, and it sold. So dynamic pricing really does work. But you just need to understand your customer, and you need to watch the numbers very, very carefully on a day-to-day basis to understand if the surges that you see is representing true demand or not.
No, nothing. I was just like, if you've got like a few minutes left, I wanted just to add that although I focus mainly on quantitative studies, that's not the only type of studies we do in Singapore. We do a lot of qualitative stuff as well, because we understand that the arts cannot just be reduced to numbers. And I always say this, although I'm an economist, I'm not attempting to replace people who talk about the transformative, the aesthetic experiences. At the very least, what I'm trying to do is provide a monetary base with which you can advocate. Then after that, all the transformative, the spiritual, the aesthetic effects, and that's just really the most delicious icing on the sponge cake that I've provided. We want to do also longitudinal studies, but it's very expensive because especially for children, how, that first experience, that repeated experiences, that access really help them in life, whether in terms of academic competencies or life competencies. I'm still looking for a researcher who is willing to take this on, because the researchers we have in mind are busy with anything else. So if anyone wants to volunteer, please come see me after this. We're also moving to behavioral experiments, and one of this is to see how we can move people who like free concerts to go pay for tickets in the next one. And so we're partnering, I think, Esplanade on this. Happy to do that with SSO as well, but I'm sure you have it all nailed down.
Okay. Okay, with that, thank you, panelists, and I hope you all have an enjoyable rest of the day. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, a big thank you to our moderator, Ms. Serene Lim as well. Let's give her a big hand. Thank you very much. So can we have a group photograph, please, with our panel? So a very fruitful, very interesting discussion about economics, who pays, something for us to ponder about in this sector. Thank you very much once again to our wonderful panel for discussing and breaking it down. Thank you. So, well, it's time for tea break. Quick time check. It's about 10:45 now. We will be back here at 11:10 a.m., so about 25 minutes. Once again, tea break on your left-hand side. Enjoy yourselves. We will see you back here for the sharing session. Now, next session will be a sharing session on accessibility programs and efforts. So see you at 11:10. Thank you. Hello everybody, welcome back. Enjoyable tea break for all of you. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to get straight into our next session. Well, it's a sharing session on accessibility programs as well as efforts. So we have a very huge, big panel here today, and of course there are lots of insights to share with all of you. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Ms. Pauline N. Tan, Vice Principal, Academic and Student Development, School of the Arts. We have Ms. Asma Alias, Deputy Director, Education and Community Outreach, National Heritage Board. Ms. Neo Paik Hoon, Deputy Director, Community Arts and Culture, People's Association. Ms. Amanda Chan, Senior Manager, Silver Hubs, Heritage Institutions, National Heritage Board. Ms. Grace Low, Head of Community Engagement, Esplanade, as well as Mr. Yeo Kirk Siang, Director, Heritage and Research Assessment, National Heritage Board. Our moderator today for this panel will be Ms. Tan Shi, Head, Partnerships and Patronage, Singapore Art Museum. Once again, Pigeonhole is now open for you to submit your questions, or if not, you can ask questions via the microphone as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the time over to Ms. Tan.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Culture Academy for having us here today, for their hard work also in putting together very meaningful and much needed opportunity to share best practices and learnings on accessibility. So my name is Sharon, and I head up the Partnerships and Patronage team at the Singapore Art Museum. And I have the privilege today of introducing 6 very committed and progressive individuals who have championed specific causes in education and community access. I hope everyone had more than just a little tea during the tea break, because I'm well aware that we are what stands between you and lunch. Nonetheless, I encourage you to get on your phones and type out the questions as the presenters share their experiences so that you don't forget your burning questions. Please indicate to whom your questions are addressed to, so we can look forward to a robust dialogue following the presentations. So trust me, your lunch is going to taste much better if you work hard for it. So we're going to start with a focus on education before moving on to community arts and intangible cultural heritage. First up, I'd like to introduce Ann Tan, the Vice Principal overseeing both the academic and student development at School of the Arts. She looks into the holistic development of SOTA students as well as the professional development of the staff. She will be sharing SOTA's perspective of how arts programs in schools affect one's well-being and the appreciation of the arts. So over to you, Ann.
Since this is a sharing session, I'll just present it from here. I make it more informal, and I have also bucked the trend a little bit without any PowerPoint slides, because I thought that it should be an open one. We can have a discussion, and I'll just share a little bit of our SOTA's perspective. So we are a 10-year-old school, very young compared to many of the established schools out there. But I think for a very young school, we have I think by the blessings that people have given, in terms of their generosity of their time, their talent, and their effort, SOTA has made a lot of progress through the years. However, we just did our 10-year review, and we feel that we have a lot more to do. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about, since we're on the topic of accessibility and diversity, so maybe to share a little bit about some of our thoughts and what are some of the efforts that we are doing in the area of education to make it more accessible to the students out there, and hopefully, impacting the future, and at the same time, our take on diversity. So in one of the review that, during our 10-year review, we look into our student population, and one thing that really got us quite worried about, and something that we really want to work on, is the diversity of our students. I have visited the schools in overseas before, and schools that, in terms of their population diversity, that best reflect the diversity of of the population of the country, those kinds of schools will produce very interesting results and learning opportunities for their students. And we thought that, yes, this is something that SOTA would like to do. So one big aim that we are working towards is making our student population a reflection of the population of Singapore in terms of the race, in terms of gender, and even socioeconomic class. And so, like all educational institutions out there, we have financial assistance schemes, we have bursary, and then we have donations given generously by lots of people out there for our poorer students to give the assurance that, even if you're poor, it doesn't matter, you can still come and study in a school like SOTA. But that in itself may not be very effective because, some people just put a glass ceiling to them, to the kind of opportunities that they have. So this year, we launched the Arts Development Award. And we want to reach out to primary school students. Before they even thought about wanting to come to SOTA or not, we thought that maybe we should reach out to them proactively. And so we have connected with primary schools all over Singapore. And the message out there is this: if you know of a kid who is from the low-income family, exhibiting talent, exhibiting potential, let us know. And we have this Arts Development Award where we will give them opportunities to go for lessons that will deepen their interests and their skills. And these students will also be working with us. We will take them on board. So we will take them to come to SOTA, to come and interact with our students. Our students will play buddies to them. Their older brothers and sisters, take them around SOTA, let them see the kind of opportunities that they can have. And in a way, inspire them and say, come and join us in this school if this is an area that you're interested in. So these are students who are from Primary 4, Primary 5, and Primary 6. They are identified by their teachers. And we have our first batch of 24 students. And we are looking forward 2019 to 30 students coming on board. And we are hoping to grow the number in time to come. So on our side, we tell our students, you cannot just stay within the school. You have to go out there, tell people about what a wonderful educational experience you have here, and encourage the younger students to come and join us. So in the pipeline, we are not just looking at the lower income group. We are also thinking about middle income families where they may think that our school fees, because compared to an average secondary school out there, we are a specialized secondary school. And so we are like any of the independent schools out there. Our school fees are the same. It's about $300+ a month, vis-a-vis $32 that you pay in an autonomous school and $16 that you pay in a mainstream secondary school. So some middle-income families may be put off by that $300+ a month. And so we are now in the pipeline. We are planning to look for a sum of money that will pay out kind of a award to middle-income families so that even if they may not be at the income level where they qualify for financial assistance, they qualify to take on this award where part of the money will go towards paying the fees and then at the same time giving them some allowance that will offset the cost of buying art materials and all the different needs. So in that sense, we are really working very hard. We hope that in time to come, SOTA will be able to report and say that we have a great variety of students. The diversity of the students, we believe, will be very good for our students who are future artists, future creative professionals, even future cultural leaders. And that will allow them to be more sensitive, more embracing of the different groups of people that they will meet later on in life. Now, in terms of accessibility, one of the things that we want to do is that we want our students to reach out to other students. I think when youth speak to each other, they have the same lingo, they understand each other better. Adults, if you watch Snoopy cartoons, the adults goes wow, 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 wow. But the children all understand each other in the cartoon, right? So I think sometimes it's the same. The young people want to get together. So we have programs in place where we invite primary school students to come and play with us. It's part of our outreach. It is also part of demystifying SOTA, because when people go past our building, they say two things. You have a beautiful building, but your building is also quite imposing. And then it doesn't help when they take the escalator up and then they see this gantry where we have to, for security reasons, we cannot let people flow through, right, the school. But we want to see how, although the gantry is a physical barrier, but when it comes to students, the gantry doesn't exist. So we have invited young students to come and play with us, invite them to our showcases, and in fact, I got a group of student leaders who are now very interested to really demystify the whole application process to SOTA. They are thinking of producing videos on how to do your art portfolio. And we're like, great, go on board and do it. And the question is, do you think we can put it up on YouTube? And we're like, go ahead, as long as you don't guarantee that do this, you will get in, because there are other considerations. So the students like, okay, we will show you the video, then you can vet, and we'll make adjustments accordingly. SOTA also plays host to school events. So our venues are constantly used for SYF, the Singapore Youth Festival events. And our teachers serve as judges and adjudicators for two purposes. One is to lend our professional expertise, and then, of course, professional sharing with teachers out there. But at the same time, we took the opportunity to look at potential students too. Those who exhibit the talent or the potential, and then we'll connect with them and we'll say, by the way, do you know that you can join SOTA? And they're like, really? And then we start that conversation going. The other part about accessibility is something that I think many of the speakers have talked about, is the transformative work that arts can do for the human spirit. And that is something that we feel that SOTA students are obliged, because of the generosity that they have received from everybody. They have that obligation to go out there and serve. Two purposes. One is our way of paying back to society that which has been very generous towards us. But the other one is for the students themselves to have a very authentic experience of what art can do in terms of healing people, bringing people together, and even providing opportunities that you never think about. So in terms of the kind of projects that the students undertake at the community level, our emphasis to them is always, how do you want to use your talent in the arts to do good to others? And so with that kind of mantra, our students very actively sought out opportunities. And then at this conference you saw in the opening act, where our music students, and some of them are not even music students, some of them are actually our theatre students, come together with our friends from MDAS. In fact, we are very grateful to Jeremiah, because he was the one who brought us together to work together with MDAS. And from a Sunburst concert comes different workshops which our students organize for the members of MDAS to do art together. That in itself, I think, is mutually beneficial for the friends of MDAS and also for our students, and they learn to see the world differently. With NTUC Silver Circle, we look at how we can use the arts for helping the elderly to be more open, because many of them, after a while, thought that, I can't do anything more, I'm old. And where we use art as a platform to get them to see and that there are plentiful of opportunities out there for themselves, and even for the dementia patients. We work with the center, we get advice from the organizers of the NTUC Silver Circle centers, some of their concerns, and then we see how we can use art as a way of providing a solution to some of the needs that they have. So we always get our students to work either locally or regionally with youths. And recently, a group of our theatre students took part in the Asian Youth Theatre. And it was a great two-day event where they meet youths who are interested in theatre. And what is very interesting is it's a youth theatre, and our students present a play about being old. And I think what was very touching to me when I went down and talked to the audience who came and watched the play was a mother was explaining to me and said, I really didn't think much about the arts. When I send my child to SOTA, it's because I know that you all provide a good education, my child wants to do art, okay, we have some mutual benefits there. But after she watched that play, she said, I now know that art can convey a very powerful message in a very emotive way. And guess what? I brought 18 other people with me, and we're like, yes. So that's great, and it's good to see how our students, I think people are more forgiving because they're students, so if they don't do well, you know, people forgive them. Or if they come up with a message that can sometimes be a little bit provocative, people are more forgiving too, but it allows us to touch on very sensitive topics. And so we want education to be something that is part and parcel of people's life. I'm so glad to hear from Sharon just now that if they have an early exposure to the arts, then they are likely to be people who support the arts later on in life. So I think SOTA is a good place to start, and we would like to play our role to reach out to young people out there to tell them that doing the arts is something good. And I'm really hoping that one day people won't just do the arts and say, do arts and then your grades will improve, right? It's more like, do arts, you improve as a person, and as a result of that, the holistic person improve. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That's great. Next, we have Asma Alias, the Deputy Director of Education and Community Outreach at the National Heritage Board. She spearheads NHB's education programs to schools and also heads up the grants team, providing funding support for heritage-related projects. She will be sharing about Singapore's Little Treasures, an award-winning heritage education program for preschoolers. Over to you.
Thank you, Shayi. Right. I think we've heard from the various speakers from yesterday and even from Anne how education is really very important. And in fact, I think for the past few decades, we've heard from the various speakers as well how museums effectively sought to really embrace the diverse audiences that we have and focusing on learning, on community, on inclusivity, right? So here at the National Heritage Board, we are no different. Right? My team and I, the focus is really on heritage education because it's really a critical component in the development of our audiences. We have, over the years, actually been developing quite a number of education programs and implementing them for various levels of students, from preschools all the way to tertiary. The whole idea when we talk about accessibility and diversity is really to be able to provide greater access for students of different levels, as well as, of course, to provide heritage touchpoints in the different educational journey, I think like Anne shared earlier, right? Very briefly, this is done through a few strategies that we have, really through promoting the use of our museums and our heritage site as authentic learning resources beyond textbooks, giving them up-close interaction with the objects and displays that we have at our museums, and also the different heritage sites and heritage trails that we have. The other approach that we have in developing our education programs is really by going down to the schools itself, which is pretty much what my team and I have been doing for the past few years. So while my colleagues at the museums are the ones that are really receiving the school groups, my team goes down to the various schools, to the various programs that we have for the different levels, to really reach out to them and to really bring the museum, bring our objects, and bring the experience to them, with the hope that eventually this would encourage them to go back to the museum or to bring their families and their parents to the museum from what we have shared with them. Of course, to ensure that there is sustainability engagement, we have over the years also been providing resources and guides for the teachers to again break down the barriers, that it's really not difficult, to bring your students to our museums, to use our museums and our objects and galleries as your classrooms, to use our objects as your lesson plans, for example. Right, so it's these three approach that we have been initiating for the past few years. But today, in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on one particular program. Like Shayi mentioned, it's one of our award-winning program, Singapore's Little Treasure. This is really a preschool program, and when we first started this in 2014, it's really one of our inaugural program for preschoolers. While we do, have been reaching out to students of different levels, but there has not really been a targeted approach then until we started this pilot program in 2014. And what really started this program was really based on field observations as well as conversations that we have with preschool teachers. The general perception is that they are too young for the museums. Your museums are boring, your museums are dark, your museums are dull. How can I bring my preschoolers there? But hey, research have shown that the museums and galleries really have a lot to offer in terms of a child's development, right? So, but how then do we break down these walls? How then do we make it engaging and exciting? And even how then do we even get the teachers buy-in? Because even adults, that we spoke to have said that sometimes I don't understand what is that object trying to convey. I don't understand what is their artwork, and parents as well. So how do I then, tell my child what is this when I don't even know, what is it about, and things like that. So we started this program, and what we did was we consulted quite a number of early childhood experts from the Early Childhood Development Agency, which is the equivalent of the Ministry of Education also, but for preschoolers in Singapore. And in terms of looking at and sharing and discussing with them how we can make the museum experience really engaging for a child of that age. So if you can see from the pictures, from the picture here, it's pretty much on object-based learning. So most of the objects that you can see in the picture here are really inspired from our national collection, from the various NHB museum as well as heritage institutions that we have. And what we did was we actually used a pedagogy, or I think called the Sitting Wonder, which is by Harvard Project Zero. It's a thinking routine. Really, there's no right or wrong answer. So basically what we did was we impart these strategies to teachers during a two-day training that we have with teachers on how to ask relevant questions to the children when you bring them to the museum. So when you look at it, when you look at an object, perhaps a simple thing could be asking them, hey, what do you see? Of course, like a 4 or 5-year-old won't be able to tell you what exactly that artifact is about, but it's about teaching them about shapes and colors, really breaking down the barriers. So, oh, I see a circle, or I think I see red, blue, and things like that. So that sparks the conversation and starts the dialogue as well between the teacher and the student. And of course, that makes it less intimidating also for the teachers, because they do not really have to, be able to, they might not really be equipped to tell the preschoolers all the details and information about the particular object. And then moving on to the next question. So what do you think it is? What do you think is being used for? Have you seen it before at home? Maybe, you can go back and ask your mom, ask your parents, have you seen this before? Have they used this before? And things like that. So the program, actually, the Singapore Seeto Treasure has 3 components. One, of course, like I said, starting with the teachers' training. It's a 3-day teacher training program where we introduce the teachers to our museums and galleries and our objects, and of course, to equip them with some of these strategies on how they can use our museums and galleries as a classroom. And together with that community that they have, how do they use our objects and the resources that we have at our museums to develop lesson plans around these objects and to conduct some of these heritage lessons in classrooms. So this could be a pre-visit before they visit the museum, so that the kids are not intimidated when they come to the museum because they have seen this before, right? So these are some of the heritage lessons that are conducted in the classrooms, again using the objects from the heritage kit or the trunk that I showed earlier. We also, of course, understand that, there is this mentality that kids cannot run, you cannot touch things in the museum. So we have incorporated strategies like, hey, touch with your eyes. So if you can see, right, they have got like a magnifying glass that they sort of do, and those are made of ice cream sticks, right? So these are, again, part of the strategies that we impart to the teachers on how you can make learning at the museum more interesting, since they are not allowed to touch some of these objects. We also loan out pop-up kits to schools that visit our museums and galleries, because again, sometimes you need to occupy them by touching some of these handling objects, and they cannot touch things on display. So these are made available as well to preschools when they visit our museum. This is the session at the National Museum, right? I'm aware of the time. So some feedback that we have gotten from teachers and from the childhood experts are that it really introduces our multicultural heritage. It really sort of gives them an introduction to Singapore's history and culture and heritage through the objects, not in a really hard data or facts, and at the same time, of course, it also make it more fun for them when they come to the museum. It make it, of course, less intimidating for teachers, and also engages parents and even grandparents in the process when they invite, some of these other, personalities to the classroom. Just some numbers. So we started as a pilot project in 2014 with only 10 preschools. We have since grown and reached out to 480 preschools, 700 over preschoolers, and we have trained over 500 educators. But numbers aside, numbers here are just numbers. What I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, it's very important for us to realize that these 7,500 preschoolers, they are your future visitors. They could be your future donors, they could be your future volunteers or culture leaders for that matter. So that very first experience at the museum is really important. And how do we do that is really by giving them access, by making it relevant, and of course, by giving them a meaningful engagement. I'm running out of time, but I just want to end with a very short video of the program to give you a better idea of what the program is all about. Thank you.
So we were quite surprised how supportive the parents were. And there was one parent who even feedback that this was a good chance for her to talk to her child about certain things that she thought she would never discuss with the child. So all these things actually encouraged the staff in my school to do even better. So we hope to continue this next year.
Great, thank you, Asma, for sharing your little treasures. I think it's great that our students are very fortunate in Singapore to have ample exposure to the arts while they're in schools. But what happens outside the school environment? Now let's take a look at community engagement. For a broad-based exposure to community arts, we have People's Association to thank for reaching out into neighborhoods and engaging with residents. Neo Pek Hoon, Deputy Director of Community Arts and Culture at PA, is a key contributor to the key contributor to the development of the nationwide Passion Arts program, which brings arts to people where they live, work, and play. It aims to be a strong, volunteer-driven, and resident-centric community arts movement. So, Pek Hoon, over to you.
Thank you, Sui. Good morning, everyone. Allow me to, before I go on, to share Pashat program, which is a very unique community arts program in Singapore, which started in 2012. May I first share about my organization? So along the way of my sharing, then you will understand why we do arts in a very different way. People's Association, or known as PA, is actually a government statutory board where we actually use program to promote social cohesion. We use program to actually bridge, bond, and build communities in Singapore. So, Pashat program is one of the programs that People's Association use to bond the people, to connect the people. So over here, community arts program that we run is actually known as Pashat program, which started about in 2012, about 7 years back. And it's not just a program. I would term it as a community arts movement because it involves a lot of people. And PA itself, our team itself, is not the driver. Our volunteers are the driver. So over here, Pashat program started in 2012 because of the Community Arts and Culture Strategic Review, Community Engagement Master Plan by the government. And we actually use arts to outreach, to deepen our reach, to engage the residents through arts. We actually also try or emphasize in using arts to achieve social outcomes or social objectives. So for example, arts is used to bond people, to connect people, to bridge the communities. So our vision, as what I shared earlier, is actually a strong volunteer-driven and resident-centric community arts movement in Singapore. And besides bringing arts to the community, to increase art participation in the community, we use arts to foster Singapore identity and build community bonding and contribute to building a gracious and cultured society. So this is what I mentioned, a network of community arts and culture club, or we call it in short CACC, are being set up across Singapore. We have almost close to about 90 of them. And these are the committees of community arts champions and volunteers that are the key driver to plan, to champion, to organize, and to implement community arts program in the community. So who are the people in our CACC? Yesterday's speaker, Calvin Ang, is one of our CACC members. We have artists, we have civil servants, we have ordinary residents, and we have school students as well. So these are the people who really plan the program, work with artists or art group to bring arts to the community. Our programs, we actually plan a variety of programs throughout the whole year. The key program is actually the Pashat Festival, which we implement usually around the period of June to August. And our pre-festival workshop for the festival actually start as early as March and usually take a few months to complete. And the artworks or the performances will then be displayed or staged during the festival time. So allow me to play a little video to show you what is Pashat Festival. I'll be using Pashat Festival 2018 video to give you a taste of the festival.
We have many members of the community, young and old, whole families come here and take part. I think 80% of the artworks here are actually done by our own residents. I hope you ignite their passion in arts.
families joining us and also neighbours from different estates coming together. And it's truly multiracial, multi-generational, and it's a great way to get to know one another. So we hope that Passion Art will bring more people together, multiracial, multi-generational, different backgrounds. It's a great way of social mixing and for us to find joy through art.
We love Passion Art! We love Passion Art! We love Passion Art!
Okay, hope you have a taste of what the festival is about. The festival started 7 years ago, so we are in the 7 years today, and it's still rather young. Like the rest of the panelists have shared today and yesterday, we try to make arts inclusive, and we try to bring arts to everyone, to make it accessible to everyone. So over here, I will touch on our approach. Passion Art adopt a participatory arts approach, and with this approach, our CACCs, our volunteers, our champions are always trying ways to involve residents in arts making. Residents can involve in co-creation, doing arts together. Residents can participate as volunteers. They can bring ideas to us. They can actually also come up with ideas to work with artists, to bring arts to their fellow residents. So residents can be involved in many ways as volunteers, as champions. Over here, artists are actually facilitators. So those beautiful artworks that you see in the community that appear in the video over the last few months, some of them are still displayed at the different corners of Singapore at the moment, are not creations or artworks by the artists themselves, but they are all creation of artworks co-created between artists and residents. So then now I will go on to share about the philosophy. We actually practice the 3C philosophy: co-creation, co-ownership, community as ownership. So under the co-creation, we believe artworks created by residents together with the artists to be displayed, to be staged in the community will bring certain kinds of identity, certain kinds of belonging, sense of belongings. And under co-ownerships, residents, participants, participating organizations, schools, students, everyone who co-created the artwork, when they see the artworks being displayed in the community location, in their neighborhoods, feel a sense of ownership, not just to the artwork, but also of their ownership in beautifying their own neighborhood with the artworks. So about community as resources, we believe in there are many talents in the community. So we make an effort to tap on the artistic talents in the community in Passion Arts. So touching on community as has talents. So over here, we actually was able to generate a very great arts interest, appreciation, participation, and volunteerism in the community. And also through this, we provide ample opportunity for artists and art groups to work with the resident to co-create artworks or to stage performance in the community space. So the involvement of the artists and artworks also help to raise the quality of the artworks or the performances that's being staged or displayed. So the second reason why we are able to promote arts to the community in a very extensive way is because of the supports of the artist community. Co-creating artworks with resident and ordinary peoples are actually providing the artist community an opportunity to widen their markets. So next slide, I will be going to share some examples. Over here, we are looking at Taman Jurong CACC. It's formed by committees of champions and volunteers who has a vision to make Taman Jurong, which is a division in southwest of Singapore, into a Singapore visual arts town. And over here, their program is known as our gallery program, which over the last 4 years, they work with many artists and residents to actually exhibit about 16 galleries. And they are still working hard on getting residents and getting artists to work with them to continue their visions. Next, I'll be showing you another CACC, which is at Chng Seletar. Chng Seletar CACC is based in central of Singapore, very near Ang Mo Kio area. So over there this year, during the Passion Art Festival, the CACC came up with a very unique idea. They actually want to reach out to residents that they less reach, which are the private estate residents, landed property, condominiums. So what they do is they understand all these people over there are mostly pet lovers. So with this knowledge, they actually bring in 2 artists, Fish and Knot. And Fish and Knot, together with the CACC, come out with this pet canvas painting projects. So they do house visit. They actually go through social media to call the resident to come forward. And they design a program in a way that at least 3 residents has to form a group to do a painting. So in that way, we have actually residents coming in families of 3 or more. We have residents coming forwards together with their neighbors to paint their beloved pets. And all this artwork were being displayed for at least 3 months during the Passion Art Festival period this year, which was from July to about September. So this is also one way that the CACC is reaching out to the residents, bringing arts to them. All those residents who come forward, most of them have never done any painting, but because with the artist guidance, the artist facilitation, they understand the color tone, they understand how to use the brush, and you look at the artwork that they have painted, they look almost professional. So moving forward, I would also like to share with you for Passion Arts, we are committed to work with artists and arts group to meet our Arts for Social causes objective. Over here, we want to nurture an inclusive community through arts by extending arts to, beside private estate residents, we extend arts to less rich community. For example, residents in rental blocks. We also reach out to residents of less advantaged with special needs. And since last year, we have started designing our programs to actually reach out to young families. So the programs are designed in a way that will attract young families to join us. They will create arts together with their children. So in a way, besides bringing arts to them, we actually also use arts to promote family bonding. And thanks to the artist community in Singapore, with their support, we are able to do so. So over the last 3 years, we have partnered about 200 artists and arts groups. They serve as art project co-creators, facilitators, and they provide guidance and teaching to the residents. So due to time factor, I will actually end here. But just to share that in People Association, we are committed to use arts to build and bond communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Pek Hoon. So besides PA, we also have the National Heritage Board, who has been resolutely getting to know residents in our neighborhoods. NHB has made a commitment to engage and reach out to underserved segments of society. We have with us Amanda Chan, the lead of NHB's Silver Hubs initiative, which offers meaningful and enriching experiences for older persons. So Amanda will be sharing with us Silver Hubs framework, strategies, and key learning insights.
Thank you, Sherry, for the introduction. Many of you may not have heard of the Civil Hubs. The Civil Hubs is an initiative of the heritage institutions under the National Heritage Board. And we were formally established this year when Minister Grace Fu made the announcement at the Committee of Supply debate in Parliament. But we actually started work informally since October 2015, so we're about 3 years in the making now. The Civil Hubs believes that heritage and culture participation and contribution are beneficial to the well-being of older people. And I wish to emphasize contribution as we are looking at seniors playing a proactive role in what we do at the Civil Hubs. And at the Civil Hubs, we look at how we can work with them, what we can do with them, rather than for them. Hence, this makes our approach different and unique. And through this approach, we look at how we can empower them, work with their abilities, focusing on their strengths, and most importantly, we adopt the person-centered approach where we put the person at the heart of what we do. It is most apt for us to commence this initiative at the heritage institutions. As the heritage institutions are focal points for the Chinese, Malay, and Indian communities in Singapore, and as we move on to later stages in life, this reflection on identity, understanding our connectedness to the society, our place in the universe, summarized as spirituality, become even more important. The heritage institutions are also well placed to serve older audiences in Singapore. As from the top chart, the heritage institutions see a sizable proportion of Singaporeans and Singapore permanent resident visitors. We also see an average of 7% of our visitors being seniors. The Civil Hubs is cited in our SG Heritage Plan, Singapore's first master plan for heritage and museums sector, under our communities track. In this track, we focus on reaching out to the underserved audiences, and that includes the seniors. So how does the Civil Hubs operate? This is our framework. We want to position the heritage institutions as community spaces which offer enriching arts and heritage experiences for older people. We achieve this through three strategies. One, to promote the use of the heritage institutions as platforms to enhance the well-being of older persons. Two, develop signature age-friendly programs at the heritage institutions. And thirdly, to conduct research and build capabilities in the heritage and museum sector, and also in the care sector. And we are very aware that we can't do this alone. Hence, we bring on board health and social care institutions and organizations and take on a co-development and co-ownership approach in our collaborations. The next slide gives you a snapshot of the number of senior visitors and number of in-depth programs we have carried out from 2016 to 2018. One of the key platforms where we showcase older persons' participation and contribution is the annual Culture Fest, which each heritage institution organizes. Through this platform, we showcase the talents of older persons and their spirit of continuous learning, perseverance, and commitment in order to reach this level of expertise to be able to perform in front of a public audience. In order for the heritage institutions to be platforms to enhance the well-being of older audiences, one of the necessary conditions is accessibility. This requires more than just barrier-free, but a sensitivity to the physiological changes that comes with aging. So we want to ensure that when they visit our heritage institutions, the whole experience is not a draining experience for them. And to start with that, we look at sitting, something very basic. So we ensure that there are sufficient rest stops in the galleries for the older persons when they're visiting. This will ensure that they have sufficient dwell times in our galleries, and also they will have a very meaningful and good quality experience. We had a good number of age-friendly programs. I would like to highlight one of them here, which is the Conversation Starter Kit for seniors. I brought a few sets of them. If any one of you might wish to have a copy of them, please feel free to approach me after this sharing session. So this Conversation Starter Kit was a very landmark project for us because it was the first project that we brought out to the media. And with this, it caught a lot of attention because people are just beginning to understand what's happening as well in the aging society in Singapore, and they begin to understand what is heritage and culture to do with aging. And when I presented a poster at a global global conference for integrated care earlier this year. And this conference was attended primarily by healthcare and social care professionals. The first thing that people ask me is, what is National Heritage Board doing here? So it is really a very good starting point for me to explain what heritage and the culture can contribute to the well-being of older persons. So with this project, we actually got into a very good position to start what we are doing right now. And it also showcased the power of collaboration. So this project is a collaboration with the National Council of Social Service, as well as 4 partner social service agencies. The third strategy of the Civil Hubs is to focus on conducting research and building capabilities. Our funders are always interested to know how we utilize the funds, and underlying this interest is the question of what impact we are making through what we do. Hence, we draw a program design. When we draw a program design, we are very clear about what each program's objectives are and what we, meaning the Civil Hubs as well as our partners, want to achieve with the program and how the participants can benefit from it. And in order to understand the impact as far as possible, we use validated measurement tools. While we want to empower the partners we work with in the use of heritage and culture resources in the care experience, we also want to empower ourselves, and this includes colleagues from the heritage institutions, in National Heritage Board, and also in the heritage and culture ecosystem. This means that our volunteers and our Museum Roundtable members are also included. Have we created an impact in the lives of the older audiences and in the care sector? Most certainly we have. So I leave you to have a read of some of these comments from the participants. We have just marked the 3rd anniversary of the Civil Hubs works with older audiences, and what have we learned? Firstly, we need to look beyond our heritage and culture sector and align what we do with national level concerns and issues. In Singapore, aging is an area of concern. So how are we in the heritage culture sector able to contribute to being part of the solution, to support aging in place, to support upholding the dignity of people living with dementia and their care partners, and people in palliative care? And secondly, we also look at emphasizing that we can't do this alone, and we therefore need to gain the trust of our health and social care partners, and working alongside is very important. Therefore, the key word is co-development and co-ownership, which will be given a head start when we adopt a common language and understand the technical terms which the health and social care sectors use. Thirdly, validating the impact of what we do is very important, not just to be answerable to our funders, but also to assess if we're on the right track. And the 4th lesson is the importance of working with partners who share a similar vision and committed to working together. Therefore, we spent a long time in discussions with our partners, and some of these discussions can take between 6 months to even a year before a program is given birth. And the 5th learning point is that we need to invest in ourselves by building capabilities. This will help us to speak in the same language as our health and social care partners. And finally, let us not be shy about telling people about what we do and what we have achieved. This is not to say that we are being narcissistic about our work, but by shouting about our work, we hope that more in the heritage and culture sector will also embrace the belief that heritage and culture participation and contribution are beneficial to the well-being of older persons. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. So while we're sitting here in this beautiful recital studio, you may be surprised to learn that the team at Singapore's premier performing arts centre doesn't rest on its laurels. It doesn't bask in its hallowed concert hall and theatre. As introduced by Rochelle yesterday, the Esplanade's Community Engagement Unit, headed by Grace Low, organises some 500 activities each year, reaching out to over 10,000 underserved beneficiaries. So Grace will be sharing with us in greater detail one such project working with music and youth at risk.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are the community engagement team. We are a dedicated unit within the Esplanade, and we bring programs beyond the walls of the center to underserved communities where we bring to life the social mission of the Esplanade. Our universe encompasses working alongside social service organizations. We work with vulnerable children, at-risk youths, the elderly, especially those who stay in the rental flats. 3 years ago, we started to work with the migrant communities, especially migrants in crisis, those who have had experienced workplace injury, and we also went into the areas of special needs. For a start, I think we went into working with parent support groups for children with autism, and I think this year we're starting to work in the areas of mental health. Today, I'd like to especially just share one of the projects we've done. I think across all our over 500 programs, it covers broad-based, and then of course, in a year I do 9 flagship projects. These are the long-running ones. They range between 2 months to sometimes 8 months. We just completed a dementia project, 8-month project at the Khoo Teck Puat Hospital. Yeah, we are also in the hospitals and we are in the hospices. This Songwriting for Hope project is now in its third year run. At the Singapore Girls' Home. It's currently ongoing as we speak. We haven't completed it. To date, I think over the last 3 years, some 60 teenage girls have been involved in this project. Beyond teaching an art skill in planning a project, we also consider the potential levels of transformation. Very importantly, will the program content uplift spirits? Will it help increase the self-esteem and confidence of participants? How and where can the project help participants stay connected? And how do we ensure it empowers participants where their voices are heard and their needs considered in the design of the program? And all these are considered even before we start. This is a typical working model of our flagship project. Esplanade cannot work alone. First, we have to assemble a project team, and usually it's cross-agency, cross-organization project team. It comprises social service organizations, and when necessary, we have also involved the social sectors, and I think the recent project at the Khoo Teck Puat Hospital, I have to work alongside medical doctors in our project. We are a charity, so we need to secure donors and sponsors, and I think also working alongside artists. I think the role as Esplanade, as the National Performing Arts Center, is to also help develop artistic capabilities of local artists, and we are looking at artistic excellence not just on our stages, but also in the work that we are bringing off-site into community. Hence, we see Esplanade actually playing a very important intermediary role in the areas of community arts. I would say the last 5 years for me, being part of this team, has been an eye-opening, a very humble journey. Through the work at the Esplanade, specifically working with youths, I was so stunned to realize the extent of poverty in Singapore. We don't read and hear much about it, but it's there. I work along with a lot of young people. Don't say, why will you be coming to the Esplanade? They share that they can't even afford a train ticket to City Hall. But I would say the greater poverty over that of financial situations is the poverty of hope. In every school that I go to, I will find pockets of students, and this also sometimes include a couple of the elite schools who tell me, young people, all about 14 and 15 years old, sharing me that they don't see hope for the future. Now, we all know that the arts can inspire hope. And I think all of us in this room, we're in the business of giving hope. And so I think this was a genesis, and I said, as the Arts Center, we can't sit back and do nothing. We can't say, hey, this is YMOE, they have to do something about it. But so we felt that we got to do something, and that was the genesis why we started a Songwriting for Hope program. I think in shaping this program, we had to consider a few things. Because we wanted to address this feeling of hopelessness in young people that we come across, we wanted to use songwriting to help a youth communicate difficult thoughts and feelings. And the very important thing was, this project was not meant to make songwriters out of participants, and that they had to learn a skill for the sake of it, but more importantly, to use songwriting to actually bring out difficult emotions, because there are many things that that you can speak through the arts, where you struggle to say through the spoken word. And then the beauty of songwriting, to write authentic lyrics, you first have to dig deep. You first have to come to terms with what you're feeling. So we taught these kids the use of metaphors and imageries to describe their feelings. And of course, having to find the right community partner. We need to find someone who was like-minded. And more importantly, I think, to ensure the emotional safety of each participant, we have to be responsible. So for this project, if I haven't assembled a team of counselors, a team of youth guidance officers, and sometimes a psychologist, I will not start the project. So because we work with young people who have undergone a lot of trauma, abuse, and some of them are experiencing depression, and to us, care had to be taken to ensure that the program does not cause tension or stress. And I think also it also speaks about the arts, because it's able to unlock very deep-seated feelings. And what happens when there's an emotional meltdown? What happens when all the demons come out? And you know, all of us working at the Esplanade, we are not trained to handle that. And that's why we work alongside these counselors, and they helped us in this program. Typically, it takes us about a year. A year to plan, first assemble the project team and to plan this project. So for this songwriting project, we had to assemble a project team comprising, yes, the staff of Singapore Girls' Home. I had to work with MSF to have that commitment that at every session, your social worker is there, your youth guidance officer have to be present. And this was very, very critical. It was non-starter if you don't have that. And of course, working alongside, we work with an arts collective called Diamonds on the Street. We led and developed this program together with the artists in doing a songwriting for these girls. And I think importantly is also increasingly realizing that we also need volunteers to support our program. I think that the journey of songwriting is a very, very intimate, emotional journey, and some of the girls, you need that kind of mentor to accompany you along with it. I think for us, we've come to learn that actually teaching an art skill alone is not enough to bring about true engagement and impact. It is important to incorporate carefully guided planned reflection in every project. If not, you're just touching the surface. The experience of hope is a critical component for the project, because without hope, a young person does not have the motivation to change his or her circumstances. There's no point going to school or getting a job. So we always look through our program, how can it motivate participants to see every setback as an opportunity for transformation? And also the value of starting small. A lot of times, we like to start things in a big way, but we realize no, because we're talking about people's lives, there's no chance for mistake. So you make sure even before you start, you get it right. So a lot of our flagship project, I always do a small pilot run first, and then we start to see, is this good to go into community? And then the final thing I want to talk about is measuring impact. I think I've come to learn that happy faces at your programs does not mean it was impactful. A lot of times when I speak to people, they use the word outcomes and impact interchangeably, but it is not the same thing. For us at the Esplanade, impact happens when we exit the scene. That means in our project, I must ensure 6 months, currently we're looking at 6 months, we do documentation, even when we're not there. What's going on in the lives of these participants? So in the case of Singapore Girls' Home, I have my youth guidance officer, we are checking on them and how are each participant doing? And that's how I know about impact. I'm also very uncomfortable about using KPIs to measure the work we're doing community. As I shared, we're talking about people's lives. I look forward to the day where we look at KII, Key Impact Indicators. I think moving the next step, we are trying to see how are we trying to involve now, we call it secondary impact, the family of our participants. I could see that many of the songs that were written by the girls, they have dedicated to their parents. I would say almost the majority of the songs that were written. And of course, to explore research possibilities, I'll be talking to Sharon at lunch, and I'll just play a presentation. I'll end my presentation with a video.
Unbreakable me, I'm wonderful, yes, I'll make it true. Yeah, not nothing holds me down. I'm powerful, yeah. I'll break the walls. I'll find my way out.
Some of the girls, they are not able to express themselves when they face challenges or difficulties in their life, and they bottle it up. As a result, people might not be able to help them in a way that they need.
We have quite a number of girls. It's not always possible for us to spend a huge amount of time with each girl, so we do not know all their stories. It's heartbreaking at times, knowing that perhaps if that particular event or that particular person has not gone away, they wouldn't be here.
I think it's a really good program because it has a very tangible deliverable, right? It, I think, throws a positive challenge to girls to face either people or issues in their lives, either physically through the song or internally as well.
I wasn't very confident about myself, but after I went through this program, the people around me gave me light and allowed me to find myself. They gave me the confidence I didn't know I had, and I found a new way of expressing my emotions, which is through music.
Nobody in this life, right, likes to go through sadness, right? Nobody likes to go through pain. But when I hear these songs and I listen to all the lyrics, right, I see that something very beautiful can come out of sadness, and something very beautiful can come out of pain.
To you, maybe this program might be just an ordinary program just for you to write songs and like just be a singer or composer. But this program has impacted my life in a different way. This program has made me become more confident. One of the volunteers encouraged me and stood by me every session and tell me that I'm good enough and my song is great. They really made me feel that I'm enough.
Thank you, Grace, for sharing with us. Yes. Thank you for sharing with us this side of Esplanade that we might not see beyond, the two beautiful domes that we are very familiar with. And finally, on my right, the gentleman who has been patiently waiting to share about a very exciting topic close to our hearts and our stomachs. Yeo Kek-siang, Director of Heritage Research and Assessment Division at the National Heritage Board, will be sharing with us why we should be thinking about being prouder of the food we so obsess about.
Thank you. I just realized that, I kind of regret agreeing to speak on the topic of food, especially just before lunch. And I will try to keep it short and stay with me. Maybe I'll make you hungry and enjoy your lunch even more. So my presentation today will talk about food as a form of intangible cultural heritage, how it brings people together. And the second part of my presentation is actually talking about the UNESCO nomination that we are all working towards to list our hawker culture onto the UNESCO representative list. So as a start, maybe I just want to introduce a bit about the UNESCO conventions and definitions. I think they have various conventions. The more popular ones are actually what we would know of as the World Heritage Site. In Singapore, that would be the Singapore Botanic Gardens, and internationally, there will be famous monuments such as the Great Wall of China and Taj Mahal. A newer convention under UNESCO is called the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. So it's all about trying to keep the cultures, traditions, knowledge alive, and communities play a very important part as well. So what is intangible cultural heritage all about? UNESCO has various kind of categories that they have highlighted. This could include performing arts, social practices like our festivals, traditional crafts. In Singapore, we could also consider food heritage as an important part of our culture and practices as well. And these are practices that are passed down from generation to generation. Sometimes we also call them ICH as a living heritage because it evolves over time with people's innovation, creativity, and it forms part and parcel of our culture and identity. UNESCO has various lists to highlight and celebrate the diversity of cultures around the world. They call one of the lists that they have is called the Representative List of Intangible Cultural Heritage. Here are some examples like Indonesian batik. The French have the French meal. It's about the meal, the experience of the meal itself. You'll notice in the picture there is no food on the plates anymore. In South Korea, for example, they have kimjang, the making and sharing of kimchi. What do they mean by that? It's actually the passing down of the tradition and knowledge of how they make kimchi, and also the experience of coming together of people to enjoy it over a meal or even to make it together. And kimchi making is actually well and alive. It's truly a living heritage because in places like urban Korea, in Seoul, I believe many Koreans will also have like fridges to make kimchi. So it does reflect a kind of change in lifestyle and economic situations of the country as well. In Singapore, food is always a favorite topic to many people. And so when we ask people, what form of intangible cultural heritage matters most to you? Not surprising, most people of our 3,000 said food was the most important form. And I want to quote one of the visitors who participated in the poll, because food really brings people together. It's a representation of the different cultures, recipes, and dishes, and gives people a sense of familiarity and fosters a sense of community as well. So food it also helps to give a connection to our past. I think this is quite relevant in Singapore given our very fast pace of development, of change in society and all that, because food gives a reminder to our past, our memories. And it's not just the smells and flavors of food, as this quote mentions. It's also about the setting that you enjoy the food, the people that you're eating with, what happened. So all these are all connected with food practices as well. Food is also part of our culture and social identity. It helps to maintain our identity. And it's often a place where cultures can come together, because unlike other forms, whether it's performing arts or other forms of heritage, sometimes there are other barriers, maybe the language barrier, you may not understand the language, or there may be religious practices that are sensitive and you may not know about. Whereas food is quite universal and therefore it helps to bring people together. Next, on the nomination of hawker culture. When we first ratified the convention, Singapore joined 177 countries under the UNESCO convention. I wanted to look at how can we celebrate our intangible cultural heritage, how can we get people to know more about it and also bring our heritage to join the diverse cultures of the world. We held various focus group discussions. We knew that food was always a popular one from the polls. So we invited many people from different walks of life, academics, youths, cultural practitioners, people from the performing arts groups and all, and even members of the public. We came together, we discussed, we share what the conventions are about, what are the examples. And the vast majority of the people said, this being the first time that Singapore is nominating something to this UNESCO representative list, it should be something that resonates with most Singaporeans, and they all suggested hawker culture as a clear kind of choice that we should be aiming for, because many of them highlights that this food represents the multicultural identity of Singapore and our way of life. And from what we've heard from the publications, the many research, the views of people, we can kind of highlight three major aspects of hawker culture. One is the food itself, the food practices around it. It is a kind of reflection of the multicultural dishes that often are some of the fusion of cultures that you can see in the food. And it's also a living form of culture and heritage that's passed down from generations to generation, adapting to taste, adapting to changing lifestyles. And not just the food, but it's also the spaces and the communal spaces that people come together. Hawker centers, for example, are the spaces where people come together. It's a place where people of diverse races, socioeconomic backgrounds can all come together. They can feel a sense of connection to. And it's also an integral part of our urban landscape. And of course, not to forget the hawkers themselves, many of which have spent many years perfecting their culinary techniques, practices, and a lot of hard work has gone into keeping this important food culture of ours alive. So what we hope to achieve through the nomination is really to celebrate the multiculturalism of Singapore's culture, especially food culture, and as part of our identity. And also through the process, we hope that there will be greater recognition for Singapore's food culture, especially among our Singaporeans, especially among the younger generation of Singaporeans, to appreciate our food traditions, to appreciate our hawkers a lot more. And we hope that through this, it allows us to keep our hawker culture alive for future generations to come. And every Singaporean can actually play a role in this long-term effort to safeguard this particular important aspect of our cultural heritage. And why is it so important? I want to quote Professor Lily Kong of the Singapore Management University in her research and book on Singapore hawker centers, people, places, and food. She highlighted the importance of how it reflects life in Singapore and the changing face of Singapore. It's also the lifestyle, it reflects the lifestyle of our island nation. They are communities in themselves, and they are Singapore. And there are many, many efforts that we have, not just the NHB, but many agencies and many community groups can come together to celebrate and to bring greater awareness and appreciation of hawker culture. So for example, the National Environment Agency, they have a Vibrant Hawker Centers program where they get community groups to organize their own activities centered around the hawker centers. This could be performing arts, art jamming, musical performances, and so on. There are also various art projects centered around hawker centers, for example, art mural projects, where 133 wall murals were created over many hawker centers. The NHB has also worked with the National Environment Agency to look at placing heritage markers to celebrate hawker centers with significant history as well. So there are many other programs, just like to highlight a few. For example, the Singapore Heritage Festival. Food is always a popular program within the Heritage Festival. And we feature also hawkers, especially the younger generation of hawkers, and their stories as part of the festival as well. Just to also mention, there are many other NGOs and volunteers that come together, especially when we announce the nomination effort. They come together, they've self-initiated projects to try to document, to celebrate, to record recipes. Schools have also come on board. Many schools have run programs. For example, Cedar Girls, they have an exhibition. They invited me to an exhibition of hawker culture in their school. They use it as a tool to tell the new batch of students about the importance of food culture, how it brings people together. Pei Chin School and First Toa Payoh Primary School, they did a joint project. The young student in the center, he actually interviewed hawkers in the Toa Payoh area. So it's a good program to get students to understand more about their neighborhood and also understand the food practices around the hawker center. And this last photo in St. Gabriel's Primary School, they all dressed up in singlets with a Good Morning Tower. They were at National Museum telling people about the nomination effort and telling people to support the nomination effort. So, of course, there's always the favorite Overseas Singapore Day. This was in London this year. And this quote summarizes many of the feelings and sentiments of people who are living overseas, that food really creates a connection back to home, back to your friends, and back to the community. So as we embark on this nomination effort, we need the support of many people, the communities. The UNESCO evaluators want to see how is it value to the community? How was the community involved in this whole nomination process? And because of this, we've set up a traveling exhibition. We have asked people, explain and say and tell us, why do you think this nomination effort is important? Why do you support the nomination effort? And people have been writing these little cards telling us why do they support the nomination, why do they want to preserve the food culture. We also have a kind of a counter where many people can pledge their support. It's very popular with families, and even our President Halima was recently at Tampines, and she also pledged her support for the nomination as well. So I want to end off with this, the most important slide. Scan your phones if you have not done so and not pledged your support. We need all the help we can get to put our hawker culture on UNESCO. It's a way to safeguard this important cultural heritage of ours and also celebrate it with the world. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kok Siang. I'm sure that has put us all in the mood to stuff our faces. But studies have shown that delayed gratification is good character training. So we have about 25 minutes to answer your burning questions while we fortify character. So I'll start with Pigeonhole, but if anyone wishes to voice a question, please do work up an appetite by using our energy to wave wildly, and a mic will be brought to you. So right now I see that we have actually 2 questions regarding collaboration. So let's see. So I guess this would be for all the panelists. Are there any plans to collaborate among the various agencies to maximize resources so that together we can reach out to more?
Yeah. Perhaps it's not highlighted in our sharing, but we do collaborate. Right, it's just that we talk about our different programs, but I think SOTA, we have worked with Esplanade before, and we have worked with PA before. We have worked with actually almost all the museums and National Gallery. We regularly collaborate with the people there. So it may not be highlighted here, but yes, I think they like students, and our students, it's good for our students to be out there in the community to work and to see the different groups that they can work with.
Maybe I will just answer on behalf of PA. PA Passionate collaborated with NAC on cultural notes programs. So if you go to Kallang to attend like Arts Streets, Arts Bite, if you go to Taman Jurong, you will see very visible collaborations, and there are other areas as well. For NHB, there still is the community museums. Yep, and that's still a collaboration between Taman Jurong CACC and NHB. SOTA students are very involved in Passion Arts. Yep. And I think for Esplanade, Passion has our Peaks of Excellence Orchestra that put up concerts at the Beautiful Sundays. So I think there are lots of collaboration going on. It's just that we didn't highlight over here.
I would just add also a platform like this is also a good opportunity. I always look forward to coming where I can meet other colleagues in other arts agencies, because a lot of times we also try to make sure we are not duplicating efforts. Resources are very, very, very limited. So I think for the Esplanade also, when we started to realize even PA and some of our agencies are moving into community in a very big way in the areas of visual arts, we stepped out. So now all our programs are of a performing art form. Yeah.
Okay, I think all the different agencies have worked with different social service organizations, as well as I think we mentioned ECDA just now, and hospitals. So I think depending on what project they're working on, they would have to choose which are the best agencies to partner with. But of course, there are a lot of interagency collaborations as well. We have a question for Grace. You talked about measuring impact using key impact indicators. Could you elaborate more on how you would go about doing this?
This is actually my dream. I really want to, I hope it could be something we look into. So I'll give you an example. I think in our project at the Singapore Girls' Home, what gives me the greatest joy is not what happened during the program they came out with a song. I get very excited. I mean, my team are over the moon when we hear that, oh, the girls are, when they go back to their dormitories, they're teaching the whole block how to sing their song. Now, that is impact. It's not what happened during the program. When I hear about how during the parent visits, the kids are sharing the song and with their parents, and now it's in the mother's ringtone on her phone, I get very happy because it's gone beyond the family. And there's also, I hear stories, and these comes from social workers. I wouldn't know because we are not there, we're only there once a week. When I hear how a father and daughter have reconciled because they are writing songs to each other. So that keeps us happy, but it's not easy. It's a lot of work, because a lot of times after a project, we are moving on to the next. But increasingly, we're realizing that we can't close the file so quickly. We have to continue keep track on each individual person. So for example, in the work we are doing with persons with dementia, post-project, we are still interviewing family members. There's still surveys. Like, have you noticed any different? Is this elderly still humming? 1 month, is he still, does singing happen still in the home? Even in a center, are they still singing even though our artist is no longer there? So that's also for me a way of measuring impact. Because impact is long running. Yeah.
Yep. I think a related question we can follow up from that would be for maybe all the panelists as well. It's a question about the follow-up done with these communities. Given how many challenges are faced by these communities, are one-off projects helpful and safe? So.
Increasingly, we are finding out, and in fact, research have actually shown us that if you do one-off projects, it may be effective for that moment, but if you want to achieve something that is for a long-lasting impact, right, and to really see how it grows and also to learn from it, then you have to build sustainable projects. And because of that, over at SOTA, we are now encouraging our students to really plan at least a 2-year project. And even plan 2 years project with a 2+2 because they are going to influence their juniors into carrying on those projects that they have. For very practical reasons. One is that you want to build the knowledge that you have gained. Because each interaction, each experience working with that particular organization means new knowledge gain, new skills gain. And you'll be very impressed by how quickly those knowledge and skills can be passed on to the next group, and then to the next group. And as time passes, I mean, you just grow in your knowledge and skills. You become more effective, you become better, and you can even be more targeted. You can afford to drill a little bit deeper. So it will be, I think, I can imagine that many of us want to look into working on projects that are long-term. But at the same time, I think it's to find that nice balance, because if you only work on projects that are long-term, then you may not explore new ideas or new projects. So often it's the balance of time and resources and keeping some good projects going, and for projects that didn't quite work out is to perhaps close it, painful as it is, and then move on to something different or approach it differently.
Maybe I'll just add on to what is said. I think given a 10 minutes presentation time frame, we are definitely able to share the full extent really of what we do. So maybe that's why some of you might get the idea that we are just doing a one-off project. It's definitely not. And we have the commitments with some of our partners to look at things over a 2-year, 3-year period, and that's pretty much what we always want to do. And like what Grace said as well, what is the follow-up after that? You know, that part is just as important. It's not just to start it and then we leave it at the end of the program. The follow-through is very, very important. So we are definitely not looking at one-off projects, but of course, again, as Pauline said as well, there are some projects where you are just looking at, you know, how it works for now, and then from there, we take it as a pilot, and then after that, we look at how we can improve. And also, there will be cases where you realize after this one project that you probably, there's no point carrying it on because maybe the partner and you, the vision for the program and all that is different. So there's no point forcing a partnership that you know is not going to work. So as what Pauline said too, you have to make a painful decision that you have to drop it perhaps and maybe revisit it at a later time when everybody is at a more comfortable or ready frame of mind.
Maybe allow me to share our experience. I think over at PA, some of you may see a lot of programs as one-off, but I'm not sure how many of you know that PA has many, many interest groups. So just to cite an example, in 2015 or 16, when we celebrate our SG50, our Kolamai CACC partners one of the arts group, Life Arts Association, who are into paintings. And they actually work with residents to have pre-festival workshops. So residents come forward, guided and facilitated by the artists from the Life Art Association. And artworks was done in about a few months' time. And And a very quality arts exhibition was actually exhibited during the Passion Art Festival time at National Library at Victoria Street. So what happened after that? The residents themselves, together with some of the artists from Life Art Association who volunteered themselves, and they formed into an interest group. So 1 year later, the second year Passion Art Festival, we did not approach them because we encourage volunteer-driven and resident-centric. So they come forward to us to apply for some grants, and they put up an arts exhibition at the same space, National Library again. And it was much better than the first year. So because they have used 1 year to perfect their skill, they meet every week to paint, to improve their techniques. So this is what I want to share. I think there's one question in the pigeonhole that I will pick up.
Which is it the one addressed to you?
The question that's addressed to PA
okay,
about
I'll
quality of arts.
Yeah, I'll activate. Okay, so the question is, while efforts to broaden arts access are commendable, how does PA ensure the quality of the arts and not dumb down the arts in the process? I think this was also addressed yesterday to Professor Fleming, and he advised that we should not be too precious and sniffy about what people enjoy.
Yep. Allow me to share also that I was unable to share very in-depth into how we implement passion arts in the community earlier. So we have near to 90 CACC, which is across Singapore. Every CACC implements different arts program. So how do they do it? They actually work with a network of artists or arts group that come forward, whether they join them as part of their CACC member, as a CACC chairman, or they only volunteer themselves during program time. And these artists or arts group actually facilitated programs that CACC bring to the resident. So maybe I share a bit more specifically. Singapore Cultural Medallion Award recipient of 2012, Ho Ho Ying, worked with us, worked with Ang Mo Kio GRC CACCs to bring his contemporary arts to the resident. So what he did is, together with the CACC, they break down his contemporary arts techniques and art form. They organize workshops with residents so that residents learn the technique. And in the end, artworks were created and was displayed. So what PA do is we involve a lot of artists and art groups to facilitate, to guide the residents so that residents learn some painting technique, performing technique, music techniques. In a few years back, when we want to gather a lot of people to play music, and ordinary residents actually do not know music theory or music notes. So we work with SCO musicians who are professional musicians, and we ask them how. Resident doesn't know music notes, how are they going to play music? And how are they going to put up performances? So what they do, they suggest to us is we break down all the music notes, trivial from Cuba to semi-brief, everything into visual notes. Visual note in the sense that they actually draw out where your hand is supposed to place, where your finger is supposed to play, notes by notes. And residents follow that, and they learned. So in every 1 hour, residents learn a song. So in 5 hours of training, residents can put up performances of 5 songs. But we do not stop there, because when the project completed, we got a lot of feedback from the community. Residents want to learn more. They want to buy better instruments. They want to attend music theory courses. So our PA has many courses as well. So we up our ukulele courses. Even private sectors, Cristofori, Yamaha, and the rest of them come to us and say that they are starting courses because many residents want to learn. So these are some way PA has worked to bring more quality arts to the community, and in a way, residents also try to up their own quality after they have a taste of it. So I hope this helps.
Thank you.
I just want to add that perhaps we shouldn't underestimate the powerful impact that such a program may have. I mean, to a very professional artist, it doesn't look very, it doesn't look like art making in the process, because a lot more thought and it's more deliberate in the art making process. But it's through programs like this that people get introduced. I mean, myself, I was a 7-year-old kid, and my father took me to watch a cartoon movie, and there was no dialogue, no story. It was all classical music with cartoon fantasia. If you're now, I review my age, but the thing is that I remember as a 7-year-old, I was so fascinated. I mean, and my father turned to me and said, "You should not listen to pop songs. You should listen to classical music. It's very good music." And I remember that. But my father can say that to me 3,000 times, right? It doesn't kick in, you know. But when you watch music with cartoon coming in, and then my imagination was triggered. I don't get to play a musical instrument, unfortunately. I'm really an idiot in the area, but I love music because of that. So you never know. It's just to find that entry point, and then you realize that you can appreciate music, you can appreciate the arts at a different level, at a deeper level, and I think in a more emotional level, and even at a spiritual level. So that's how fantastic it can be.
I think if I can add, one of the efforts of our SG Heritage Plan is, of course, to empower our communities to take ownership of their learning, and, of course, also to document their own history and heritage and culture. And so at NHB, I'm wearing my other hat now, right? So we also provide like grants, funding, and as part of that, we also have been providing like clinics and workshops to really up the capability of our community so that they are also able to put up something for their own community. And I think that is something that we should be encouraging as well, like what Anne said. It's really giving them that entry point, really breaking down the barrier for them to be able to do something for their own community and not just to expect, like a top-down approach for some of these programs and activities. Yeah.
I think another takeaway from yesterday's keynote is, besides not underestimating these efforts, is not to underestimate your audience. Because if your audience feels that you're dumbing down to them, they're not going to come to your programs anymore. So again, do not underestimate our audiences. There's another question here. Besides accessibility, how do we ensure that our programs also promote social mixing? For example, getting strangers to mix and form bonds. It's easy to say our program promoted social mixing, but actually how?
Social mixing is the key. I think it's the trendy words today. In PA, when we organize program, it's not just you come forward to participate to work with the artists. We actually encourage the artists or even our CACC members, volunteers. Sometimes we engage professional MCs to do ice breaking. So once you do ice breaking among the participants, they actually become friends, and they mix better their friendship when they work on the arts making. The other part about social mixing is we actually try to put two groups of different community people together. For example, we have a CACC who hold annual band music concerts, where it provides a platform for different groups of bands to, youth bands to actually showcase their talents, 15 minutes per group, something like that. And this year, what it did differently is actually they invited the Malay traditional arts community on board, and they conduct pre-event workshop to gather many residents of different races to learn joget. It's a Malay traditional dance. So then the youth band has to learn to play joget music. So, and in July, a concert was organized for about 200 over people, where the band group play Malay joget music, and residents of different races, different age group from different backgrounds joget away. And because through their pre-event workshop, prolonged periods of gathering together, social mixing happened naturally. Yeah.
Maybe Amanda, you can share.
Well, social mixing is very, very laden term, and you can look at it in different ways. You might see that social mixing is orchestrated, or you might like to see how social mixing can occur more naturally. I think where heritage and culture is concerned, I think we lend ourselves very naturally to social mixing. Because from heritage and culture, people realize and understand what are the similarities and differences amongst themselves. And at the end of the day, you walk away realizing that as a humanity, whatever your heritage and whatever your culture, there are certain underlying values and beliefs that we all hold as humanity. So I don't think we deliberately orchestrate social mixing in what we do, but you often see that it happens very naturally. For example, we have these programs for the older persons in say, Malay Heritage Center, and one of the sites within the Malay Heritage Center that draws a lot of conversation and interest is the gallery on the second floor under the theme of land, where you have a display of common cutlery items, common baking or kueh making objects. And this really cuts across culture. And because we are talking about the lived experience and the living experiences of the different cultures, and all these things are really something that is very common across Chinese, Malay, and Indian cultures as well. So really, I think the whole idea of social mixing is a very natural occurrence in our context and not orchestrated. Yeah.
I just want to add something. There is a theory of prejudice, right? And how do you overcome prejudice? Is through contact. I think that's where programs come into play, because it's a whole spectrum that we're talking about. I mean, bonds and friendship, of course, is the positive spectrum. You also have the negative spectrum, which is prejudice, discrimination, segregation. So that's, I think, where programs, whether it's the arts, the heritage, plays a very important role. Getting people to understand one another, or even seeing the people in the same space, a common space where you come together. And sometimes I think in Singapore, maybe we take that for granted. And it's not a natural thing that just simply happens. It's through programs, it's through effort, it's through all these things that my fellow speakers has talked about that makes it happen here.
Any words? Okay, we have a question that kind of makes me also reflect upon the way we use some terminologies at the museum. We often ask who our audiences are and who we're reaching out to. And sometimes we'll be a bit politically correct about the words such as underprivileged, underserved, communities, youth at risk. So a question, I guess, for all our panelists also. I think it's not coming out. As we reach out to various groups to increase accessibility, is there a better name or term for the group youth at risk, or maybe other such words like underserved or underprivileged groups?
So maybe I just add, I think even within my team, we grapple with the word at-risk youth. Something we use internally, but I think when we're out in community, we try not to speak it out. Two reasons. Firstly, if that's part of your lingo, it already forms a bias. You go into community with that lens of bias. So even when I bring artists out, I don't say that I'm taking you out to engage with a group of at-risk youth. I say I want you to come out to meet very special young people, and they are, incredible, and they are survivors in the university of life, you will call it. They pass it with flying colors. And then you can see the difference, the way the artists engage them. It forms a different lens. So this is something we're very careful about when we're out in community. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to add to that? How about Anne in schools?
We never, we are youths, and to call it, from a young person to call another person to be an at-risk person, I think that's kind of odd. For us, it's more like the organizations that we work with. So it's like, it's so-and-so from this organization rather than, oh, this person is at risk or anything like that. Very often, it's more a case of us working with elderly. And I have to help the young people realize that growing old is a passage in life sometimes, and then they're like, oh, so what do you all do? And it sounds like we're alien, you know. So what we encourage them to do is to spend time with whoever that they are working with. Spend time to know them as individuals with a life story to tell. And it's from there that our young people then start to identify the person they're working with as a human being with a story to tell, a very unique history, rather than, oh, you are old or you are at risk or whatever you are from. Like, for example, we have worked together with our friends from NDAS. And when we sit together and plan a workshop together with them, it's about what kind of art would we like to create, and how can we, in the process of creating that art piece, have a conversation to talk about our intention. So you don't have to worry about the fact that that person is a handicap or anything like that, but you worry more a little bit about that conversation. How can I come into that conversation, hear you out, and hear each other out, and then together agree on how we approach this process of creating an art piece. And I think by focusing on that rather than on each other's lack or advantage or whatever you call that, becomes a way of helping us to see that, it's not a handicap, it's actually us in a very special position offering a different perspective towards something in common.
Thank you. I guess from the University of Life, to borrow Grace's term, I wanted to ask to all the participants about failure or about mistakes. So this question is, did you experiment failure at one or several stages of developing your projects or programs? And if so, what did you learn from it? In addition, I'd like to ask, perhaps may not be a mistake per se, but it could have been an oversight or false assumption that you made and which you learned from. If you could share with us your learnings, this would maybe help save some of us from making the same mistakes. Anyone, yes.
If we say that we never fail, I think that would be a lie. I think every successful project, there's always some failure along the way, right? For us, our greatest learning point is actually not to rush. Because because I work with young people, you need to give them the time to learn, to have conversation, to work out an agreement of what we want to do. So very often, in the interest of time, we will tell, the teacher play the facilitator role. We work with a particular group, then we'll just go to the group and say, we can do this. And then we tell our young people, you do this. And then, it becomes a project that's more in our head on what we think it could be, rather than one where we bring the two groups together and say, let's have a conversation. This is a general direction that we want to achieve. Then how do we work it out to craft that outcome together? And so our biggest learning is you must give time for the groups to learn from each other, to hear each other out, and then to agree on a shared outcome or shared project that they want to do together.
I mean, I tend to agree with that. But beyond that, I think you've heard from some of our other panelists as well. I think Grace mentioned about the value of the pilot run. And I do believe in that. We have to start small. As I mentioned just now, it's not always about the numbers game. It's always very important to really have the understanding of what the final outcome is going to be like. But it doesn't always have to be numbers, right? It's important to measure the impact after one project to ensure whether this is really the way to go, whether there's some improvements that needs to be made along the way before we really scale up or expand. So for my team, we've always started with doing a project with really a pilot. Like the preschool program that we started is just 10 schools, but now we've grown to 400 schools. And along the way, it's very important to get feedback from your different stakeholders, even from a young child, not just from teachers or not just from the Ministry of Education, but really parents and really to take into consideration everyone's feedback and opinion before we move on to the next level of the project.
over at PA, like what some of our panelists or speakers shared earlier, is tax money that we are using, so we do not allow failure. So what do? We experiment. We will experiment program in a very, very small way to check out blind spot, to check out area that we may not think of or we may not see during the planning stage. That's one way. Another way is we also call for volunteers, call for residents with different experience, with different expertise to come forward to work with us. So usually programs in PA are not by a small team of staff. It's usually volunteer driven. So just to share a little small project during SG50, I don't know how many of you went to Garden by the Bay and you have seen painting floating in the lake, the Dragonfly Lake. Yeah, it was a project by one of our CACC, and they get residents to go through pre-festival, pre-event workshop to paint, and they want to float painting in the lake, which is an unusual way. So they don't know how to do it, so what do? They call for help. And one of the residents happened to be a Kelong owner. Kelong is those kind of floating fishing farm in Singapore, around Singapore, Malaysia area. So this Kelong owner come forward to volunteer and teach us the techniques of floating the painting. A few years back, we did a lot of facade arts. That means painting on HDB facades at the external wall. Yeah, a lot of people find it very amazing. How do we get painting up onto the wall? Do we, like Spider-Man, climb up to paint on the wall? No, we did not. So we work with artists, we work with tentage vendor, we work with different people who we thought can give us their experience and expertise. And in the end, artworks are being painted on canvas, long enough to cover the facade corridor, external perimeter wall. And then they are being tied and hoisted onto the HDB facade. So when you look at it, you drive past, you take a bus, you saw a whole piece of painting on maybe a 20-story high tall, and you thought that was very amazing. But a lot of planning, a lot of thoughts was put into it. And we need to thank our volunteers, resident expertise who come forward to help. Yeah, so that's how we do things in PA.
I suppose failure occurs when something do not go right and we do not learn anything from it. So as long as you learn something from it, I don't think it's really a failure. So obviously there will be times when some things might not go as planned and may not have gone on or have obtained the outcomes that you wish for. So what do you learn? That's the most important thing. So one of the things I guess we learned is we realize that, as I mentioned earlier, some partnerships really are just not working right now, and therefore we need to learn to let go and decide to think about it and then maybe come back to work with a partner at a later time when both parties are ready.
Yeah, for me, I think when things don't go according to plan, there is a reason for it. And the reason is to teach you something so that the next time round you do it better. For us, I think one of the things I've learned very quickly over the last 5 years was also the artist to participant ratio. We always think that the more people you get for your program, the better. Then we turn out, actually, when you look at impact, it's not just the participant. How are you growing the artist? How are you growing his or her practice? And then a frazzled artist, you know there's no impact. It was just an activity, it's very routine. So I think we're starting to realize too that there's value in a small group size. If you're looking at impact, it's not about filling up as many people attending your program. The other thing is also knowing that what I mentioned earlier about emotional safety. I think there's something, I think we learn it the hard way. We plan activity without thinking ahead, thinking what happens when we exit the scene. And I think it was brought to me by a few educators that the after, the post-project is important, if not more important than during the project. And that's where I think for the estimate, we went to review all our programs and say, hey, that's an important factor, because we were so focused on that activity during the project. we overlooked the emotional side. So I give an example. We run hip-hop projects with school-based. These are selected at-risk youth for a certain secondary school. And I think it was also important for us, and we realized that actually it will just be an activity, but that's where we need to work hand in hand with the school counselor. Without the counselor involved, there's actually no impact. It was just an activity, and sometimes because through the genre of a certain art form, it can take you during the course of the program into an emotional high, right? If you have a ruler to measure emotional level, but what happens after that? What happens when the program ends? How do you measure a participant's level of self-esteem, and how do they feel? And this is something that I think at the very early on we realized, we needed to look at that as well. So right now for our school-based programs also, so dance and counseling work hand in hand together. At the end of the day, the art is not that medicine that heals. We are just providing that tool for expression. So whatever comes out, and that's where intervention can happen. So that's where the counselor uses our dance program to address certain issues that actually come up during the program. And likewise, for a songwriting program, where they are looking at, I've seen there was a participant who did a lot of self-harm. And for quite some time, the social worker didn't understand what was causing, what was that trigger point, but she kept hurting herself. And then it came out through the lyrics. But for us at Esplanade, looking at the lyrics, we cannot intervene. It's for intervention to happen from the counseling side, the social sector. Then with her lyrics, they could intervene and administer what needs to be administered. Yeah.
I just want to say, things are not binary. It's not failure or success. Sometimes we focus on the outcome, but the process itself is important. The process of co-creating, talking to people, having dialogue is important. Not so much the outcome, actually. And I will use a food analogy for this. You know, any of you ever participated in those kind of baking or workshop team bonding? I think a lot of times the food that comes out is actually not that great. But then nobody complain about the food, right? Because you cook it yourself, you work with your teammates to cook the food, and it was the process that you enjoy. Maybe not so much. Hopefully the food is not too bad also. But if you don't, and it's completely just relying on something you bought, then you'll be very critical, it's not sweet enough, it's not to my taste, and all those kind of things. So again, we cannot look at it just from a binary outcome perspective. Sometimes we have to focus on what is the process, how do you lead people, and what you learn and gain out of the process itself. Thank you.
Thank you. So time flies when we're having fun. I'm afraid I've eaten a bit into your lunch time. Half an hour has just flown by. But before we partake of a very tangible manifestation of our intangible heritage called lunch, please join me to thank our lovely panelists, Anne, Asra, Peng Hun, Amanda, Grace, and Kirk Siang.
And of course, a big thank you to our moderator as well, Ms. Tan Shui. Let's give her a big hand as well. Thank you very much. Can we have a group photograph, please, with our panelists together with our moderator? Thank you. So, very passionate topic that we're talking about here. Hope all of you glimpse some great knowledge, some insights into the collective minds of all our panelists here for this session. Thank you very much to our wonderful panel. Once again, let's give them a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Now, I want to flash something very quickly before we break for lunch. You can take a look at the screen. So this was what Ms. Wendy created based on the sessions yesterday. So this was for the topic accessibility for diverse communities. We do have others as well. So this is the next one. Who are we addressing, and is it old wine in a new bottle, if you remember from yesterday? We do have one more, making arts and culture accessible to everyone. And lastly, physical and psychological barriers to accessibility. So you can see it's very nicely done. It's a good summary as well. So when you go back, you can reflect on it as well. So we're pleased to inform that we will be giving this out at the end of this session. So how to get it, I will inform you later on at the end of this session. All right, in the meantime, quick time check. Please be back from lunch by 2:30. We aim to start here at 2:30 sharp. Lunch here, same place. Enjoy yourselves. We will see you back here in a bit. Thank you.